if there are any citizens' concerns, there's a microphone over here by the maps. I don't see anyone racing to the microphone. All right, we'll move to the town manager.
Yes, thank you. Just a few brief updates. We started the project that we talked about earlier this year with CGI Communications to create videos about Acton. We started some of the footage, and they're starting to reach out to some of the businesses. So if you hear about that, just have people call my office if there's any questions. A few months ago, we approved, or the board approved, the new pricing structure for the EV charging stations outside of Town Hall. And we've been reviewing that as more data has been coming in. And we're going to be coming back to a future meeting with some requested adjustments. So just stay tuned for that. Two important projects out to bid right now: the selective demo and the stabilization of the Asa Parlin House is out. Bids will be received in the next month, and also the sports pavilion project at Narra Park. The bids will be received on that in March, and hopefully we'll have some favorable bidding climate and be able to do a lot of the work for the funding that we have available. Just to note that Mothers Out Front recently sent us a memo about their concerns regarding the board's support of the Futures Act, and that would be on a future agenda of the board once the Green Advisory Board has a second opportunity to look at those concerns. So just in case someone's looking to see that tonight, it's not on tonight.
Thank you. I have some sad news. Malcolm McGregor died. He was 92. He had been the fire chief, and his service will be at the Acton Funeral Home on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. But I enjoyed working with him when I was the selectman. All right. The 710 Post Office Square has been postponed, so we'll have the Town Meeting Improvement Committee presentation.
Good evening. Let me first introduce the committee, without which we wouldn't be able to have this report. So, wave or stand up when I call your name. Ann Cadillac, Ann Corcoran, Alma Sandman, Juan Kong, Ann Chang, Jody Blomberg, and Ms. Oshie. And Pat Clifford will be. Oh, Mark.
And you?
And Steve Noon. And don't ever put another committee together with three Anns. Our task was to improve town meeting, attendance-wise, with recommendations for immediate implementation and for study for future implementation. So if I could go to the first slide, Mark. Numbers, okay. So how do we go about this? First, with the help of the town clerk, we got the attendance sheets for both special and annual town meetings from 2016 to 2019 and analyzed those. Then we went about a multi-pronged public outreach program, which included two public forums. One was held on a Saturday to test the idea whether more people would come out on Saturday than a week night. We had an email address set up, and we got numerous emails suggesting things. And we had a survey that was both done online and in hard copy. And we got 357 responses. In addition, we interviewed people who were subject matter experts on some things. The town manager, on town meeting and transportation was interviewed. Christina Richlick, who is the volunteer who coordinated the babysitting arrangements at town meeting in the past, was interviewed. Town council was interviewed, and the moderator, Joanne Berry, was interviewed. So that was how we went about this. Go to the next one. So who attends town meeting? Now, I'll pause here and point out that town meeting isn't just a status report, nor is it something like a State of the Union, information sharing thing. It actually is the legislative body of the town. So the Board of Selectmen are the executive, town meeting is the legislature. Our average attendance for these legislative sessions, annual town meeting gets about 2% of registered voters. There are 15,600 some registered voters in the town. Special town meeting does a bit better. They get 6% of registered voters, which from that we can infer that most of our voters are kind of issue oriented. They don't show up for the routine, let's approve a budget, but they do show up when there's something that they're interested in. It's still only 6% though. Our analysis showed that there were 2,874 individuals who attended a town meeting session, and by session I mean a night. There were 12 possible nights that you could go during 2016 to 2019. 76% of those only attended one or two. The attendees on average are older. They are in their 60s. Regular attendees is defining people that go to 50% or more of the sessions, numbered only 215, or 1.4% of the registered voters. And on average, they are 63 years old. And people who got perfect attendance and went to all the sessions, there are only about 30 of those. And if I count up the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and School Committee in any given year, that's probably, and a few members of the League of Women Voters, that's probably it. So what did we find out from the outreach? A couple of things. There's a high degree of interest in remote participation in voting. Now, as we stand here tonight, that is not available to us. It's not legal in Massachusetts. There is a very high degree of interest in a more predictable schedule. Some people don't want to sit there from 7 to 10 for 2 or 3 consecutive nights and want to know more when a particular article or articles are going to be taken up. And there's a lot of interest in having pro and con information and presentations at town meeting. I was somewhat surprised by that, but then when I watch my TV, that's all I see, and it's pretending to be political discourse now is 2 different people arguing 2 different points. So that was something that was also a lot of interest in. As far as barriers to attendance, what we found were pretty much the same ones we've always had. Work schedules, childcare, and transportation. Now, the survey we conducted had over 30 questions, I believe. I've just picked out a few of them to illustrate a few points. First one, current format works well. Now the people in the survey, it was 371, sorry. 64% of them said they lived in Acton for more than 10 years. 76% of them said they'd attended a town meeting. And 32% said they'd been on a town board or committee. So they're not strangers to the town meeting, or the process. But then only 34% of the respondents said current format works well. So to us, that was an indication that things need to change. Next one was open town meeting is the best form of government. It got a majority at 55%. But again, it's a fairly, given the population and the fact that some 13,000 registered voters never participate in town meeting, we can only imagine what they think of it. That was a fairly low number to us. Now the others, 64% said town meeting's too long. That shouldn't surprise any of us. 75% said the warrant booklets are informative. Now that's keep that in your head, because what we're going to say is we need to do a better job of getting more information out early. The people are looking at the information we give them. And 74% said the warrant should present a pro and con argument. Now, I'm not sure the warrant's the appropriate vehicle to do it, as opposed to an insert or a handout that would have both sides of an issue. But that was the way we posed the question. And 70% thought that we should have some sort of schedule. Now, debate is a hard thing to predict. You don't know how long things are going to take. But as I said before, there are people out there that can't commit 2 or 3 nights consecutively, and they want to have a better sense of when the article or articles they're interested in are being taken up. So what do we conclude? Well, we need to create a more customer-focused culture. If you will, the current town meeting is formatted to accommodate what the executive branch of town government needs, the Board of Selectmen. It is your warrant and your meeting pretty much. But maybe not so much around the needs of the legislative body, the town meeting members, in terms of the kind of schedules, availabilities, what kinds of preferred means of communication do they want. So what we're looking at is saying town meeting needs to improve in 3 basic areas: accessibility, predictability, and publicity. Now, accessibility, it should be easier to attend, whether it's by transportation or by childcare, and we'll get into specifics shortly. It should be shorter. It should definitely be more predictable. If you're only interested in one article, I know we all should be interested in all the articles, but if you're only interested in one, you ought to have a pretty good idea what night it's going to come up on and roughly what time. And information should be available well before the meeting, and I know we are doing more of that than we have ever done in the past. But it's clear that people look at the information we give them, and it should be given to them in whatever means is most appropriate for them. Printed warrant's fine for me, but most younger people look for it on social media, electronically, things like that. So we need to do a better job of getting our information out there, because really our target market is people who are under 40, because they seldom come to town meeting. Only about 5% of people in their 30s have come to any session of town meeting in the last 3 years. Mostly when you look at that breakdown, so people in their 40s, it's like 23% of them. So if we could get the 30-year-olds to come in the same frequency as the 40-year-olds, then we'd double the size of our town meeting just by doing that. But we have to be able to reach them in a manner that they're more familiar with. So with that, I will turn it over to Pat, who will talk about specific recommendations.
Either the microphone has to come down or I have to grow. Guess what? Thank you. This committee put its recommendations together on a consensus format, and it was extremely easy for us to come to this because we had heard a great deal of fairly passionate input, either through the public hearings or through the surveys or through emails to us. So it came together very quickly. And I'd just like to elaborate on some of the things Steve said a few minutes ago. So we have some recommendations concerning accessibility. And I think the way to think about this is how do we transfer from what we have into a little bit different way to think about what we're doing. And that applies to the overflow room, which we think can become, we say more family friendly here, but a more casual environment rather than this typical seated theater arrangement that we have in the auditorium, so that families who have children maybe a little too old to watch a movie might be able to come and maybe work on their homework in an environment where they're used to studying anyway, have Wi-Fi access, whatever they need, so that they could, without disrupting the flow of the meeting, without trying to get into the auditorium, would have a place to go and be comfortable. And maybe even, be more comfortable than with their laptop squeezed into the little seat like some of us are up in the back row. So that's one thing we're trying to do, is find a way to appeal to, again, this target demographic with our environment. For people who need the transportation, and we had members on the committee who work with the senior population and also those with various disabilities that make it tough to get to the high school easily. We'd like not only scheduled transportation, but publicized scheduled transportation so that they know what to expect, both coming to the meeting and leaving. And we ask that remote participation be studied as it can be by some other group as you go along with this whole effort to keep town meeting attendance high. Recommendations in terms of predictability. Again, the more information that people can have ahead of the meeting, the better off we're going to be in getting people to understand the flow of the meeting and when you expect things to happen. They very much want an agenda. I don't think I need to say anything more. They want a list that tells them what's going to happen. They don't want to try to extrapolate it from a book. They want to know. And it seems reasonable to at least be able to give them some broad outlines that are more helpful than, well, we'll see how it goes and what happens at 10 o'clock. The high interest articles are the ones that, as you know, bring out the biggest groups. They could be a land purchase, they could be obviously something like a social policy issue like marijuana, that kind of thing. People want to know when that's going to be scheduled. They are willing to see it out of normal warrant sequence in order to be able to plan to be there. So we suggested that time period between 7 and 9 as a period where we could do these high interest things and then schedule the normal warrant order around that. Limitation on presentations. Every year we try. Every year we get a little bit better at it, but we'd like to have the presentations even shorter because we believe that if there's enough information available ahead of time, that people will come to the meeting with the information they need. Usually they know how they're going to vote, so 5 minutes is what we're suggesting. Allow, to the extent the moderator will permit them, con presentations, and then establishing an adjournment time. Again, this gets back to the whole idea of the agenda. Recommendations for publicity. Great interest in a social media site. Every single meeting I went to, regardless of what we were talking about, people wanted to see more information on social media. Our recommendation to have it established by the town is because of the accountability factor. We can't just have some message board out there that nobody's going to respond to or monitor. It's got to be owned by someone. We hope that an educational video on town meeting can be prepared. Lots of people have moved to town without really understanding what it is that town meeting is allowed to do and what it can do. Videos of pro and con presentations. This has been something that over the years, more and more, your committee has taken up the responsibility for in conjunction with the management, so it would be good if we could continue to build on that. The warrant descriptions that are in there are good, but even more layman's language is considered to be helpful. Maybe a short piece that just gives us almost a subject line orientation, that kind of additional information. And we talked a lot about possibly providing in the warrant for each article a QR code that would allow people to, access that and go to all of these other sources. So in other words, it would be a gateway into the information available. So those are the kinds of recommendations we're thinking about near term. And then we had some on here that would be future studies for another committee. Certainly, we're done with our work. Remote participation, as Steve said, great interest in that. Whether or not that's going to be feasible is in the hands of the legislature, obviously, but we'd like to have it monitored. Consolidated voting, which is sometimes called the New Hampshire model, is the way that town meeting discusses and deliberates, is then made available through the ballot at a separate time in a separate location. So that if you didn't attend town meeting and you weren't able to vote, at some point you would have an opportunity to cast a ballot. As I said, that's what they do in New Hampshire, so there's plenty of information on how it works. It's just a matter of not being able to do it in Massachusetts. Again, the study should probably look at representative town meeting. There is interest in that, although there are people just as passionate about not changing as there are about changing. So that needs a lot of attention at some other point. And then bylaw changes, which are internal, that will allow us to be more flexible. If we ever wanted to go to a Saturday town meeting, for example, which we had interest in the survey, that would be one avenue that we'd have to examine and go forward on. So you want to take the priorities?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. This says priorities for April, and I know you all have more priorities in the next 7 weeks than anybody, and I don't know how many of these you'll be able to get to. But if we could work on getting the information flow to be better, particularly electronically. Work on changing over the overflow room, which maybe we won't even need this year, but maybe we could start getting sort of that cafe feeling to it for folks. More publicity on the transportation. An agenda for the schedule of the articles would be great. If there is a high interest article, which you all would be the judge on, work with the moderator to identify that and get that scheduled ahead of time. Cut down on the presentation times to as few minutes as we can handle. Allow presentations, again, at the discretion of this committee and the moderator as to when you think that would be effective, and then establishing a firm time for adjournment. So that's the last slide, and I think we're done. You all have the study. I think Steve can deal with the questions, and thank you very much from all of us for the opportunity to do it. It was a great committee.
Thank you for a great job. Well done.
Questions?
Dean?
Your thoughts, please, on the one hand, people want to have a shorter town meeting, but they want to be able to have it on fewer nights. They want to be able to have the meeting end at 10 o'clock or something like that, but they also don't want to go 2 or 3 nights in a row. So how do we cut down the agenda? Or would you recommend looking at, having multiple town meetings, maybe on a quarterly basis, as is done in some other towns with representative town meeting?
I think we start with trying to shorten up the one we have. I mean, presentations, 5 minutes seems like quite a goal, but as Don McKenzie used to say, the Gettysburg Address took 2.5 minutes to deliver, and none of us have anything more important to say than that. So I think we need to consider the fact that we can make it run more efficiently. Are there some inconsistencies in the survey? Of course there are. People answer the questions. They want to hear more of this and less of that, but they don't want the thing to go into 3 nights. I think where we focused on a few survey questions, it was the ones where we saw like 70% of the survey respondents wanted to see it, not 50. So I'm not a big fan of multiple town meetings, simply because they tend to bring out not the whole electorate, but a special interest group, if you will, based on what's on the agenda. I think when we have tried having a meeting just for, say, zoning articles, I don't know that we got much better attendance than we would on the 3rd night at 10 o'clock when we usually wind up taking up zoning articles.
Thank you.
John?
Yes, Steve. This year we have 42 articles on the warrant, 23 are on consent. The first night are all appropriation articles. The second night are all bylaw articles. Now, a number of the articles have to be on there because they're about what makes government go. They've got to be acted upon and passed to keep government going, during the course of the year. And maybe at the outset we could explain that point. What I, it seems to me it's such a balance that, the essence of New England Town Meeting, which has served us so well, over the years, is an article is presented, there are questions from the audience, there are discussion, anybody who wants to, registered voter could come and participate, and then we vote on the article. Now, one of the things that was, really clear from the survey is that 67% of the people who responded, I think we had about 400 respondents, wanted remote voter participation. 55% also said, open town meetings the best. We cannot do remote voting until the state legislature would change General Laws Chapter 39, Section 10, which seems to clearly imply that all voters have to be in the room or the subsidiary room. There was also a recent article in the New York Times. It was a study by over at MIT of a remote voting app that works off of cell phones, which is the common app that municipalities around the country use. And the MIT study said it was just easily hackable and very flawed, and it shouldn't be used. So it's a lot of work that has to be done. Also, when we look at town meeting, we're doing it over essentially 2 nights. I mean, that's a great improvement from when we got here in the early 80s, and it was easily 4 and 5 nights, and it was very tedious. So the question I would have for Steve and the committee, particularly our younger members of the committee, Jody and Liz, what kind of balance can we strike, to make this, to make this work and fill the auditorium up would be my goal. Instead of 300 people, 700 people. What do you people think?
Well, I think a lot of the things that
You're on TV.
I think a lot of the things that we recommended are trying to strike that balance. So we also recommended putting more things on the consent articles and really having that predictability so that when people want to come out, they know when to come out. Because you're not going to get 30 and 40-year-olds who work and have little kids to come and sit for 2 nights from 7 to 10. It's probably just not gonna happen.
Striking a balance
Yeah.
with the kids.
Jody, you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, to some extent, when you get to schedules where people know when they can show up for a particular item, and they can show up and vote, I think that would help a great deal. I had, the last town meeting, I was there with my family. I left because my little one had it. I can't, and the auditorium really helped in that regard, the overflow room. And then, I came back and I missed a vital vote because it happened as I was driving up to the school. So I think just simply being able to schedule would make a big difference. And then moving as much as you can, as Liz said, to the consent calendar.
Well, what we did last year, the 3 main articles, the town budget, the school budget, and the Kelly's Corner infrastructure project were completed. Those 3, plus the preliminaries, were all done by a few minutes after 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's been a lot of improvement made. I'd like it to turn the corner, I think, all of us on the committee, to see some of the priorities adopted as quickly as possible.
Well, we owe a great deal of thanks to work that Pat and Ann Chang did 10 years ago in conjunction with the League of Women Voters in making real headway in streamlining the process, as well as, there was a time when you'd vote each line of the town budget.
Peter?
I was just going to say, the truncated process makes it hard to get information out early, I think. I mean, the budget comes out in December. It changes right up until the warrant comes out a lot of times. The ALG may have voted on the budget at this point finally, but it keeps changing. It's only 3 months between the time the budget first comes out and the warrant gets mailed out. So, and we don't even know what's on the warrant until a month before it goes out. So how early you can get information out to people, that's just a logistical obstacle.
I agree. I think, my compliments to the town manager. You have in your packet a more complete warrant than I've seen in many years, and it's only February 24th.
Yeah.
Many of the things that we're talking about, they change. They don't always change very much, Peter.
Yeah.
So yeah, there may be some changes in an amount here and an amount there. As we all know, it's not even what's in the warrant that we vote on. It's the motion that's read by the moderator. So in effect, you can go with the best information you have as early as you can get it. And then you always have the backstop of, when it comes to town meeting, if the number is different, then the motion's going to have the correct number in it. But I agree, it's getting things out early is very important, but also very difficult to do.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how we compare to other towns. I know you were only supposed to look at this at Acton, so but did you have any discussions? I know Pat's the clerk in Concord. So
we actually had people, each one of us took a town and kind of watched the video of the town meeting, looking to see if we could find any great ideas that we missed. Sadly, we did not find any.
Right. I mean, I think participation is obviously the biggest issue, and
I was
just from
happy
my
to see.
sense, I don't think that we're, other towns get a lot more participation than we do, maybe. But
I think Westford actually has a numerical quorum that they have to meet. And,
yeah. Okay.
Is that true, John? There's actually a number of people that have to show up in Westford for.
I think for the special, not for an annual.
Okay.
I believe, but I pay attention to Acton now.
And also, I think we've made strides in accessibility issues. Certainly, we're legally required to accommodate all kinds of disabilities, but we now have the automatic screen write out for people who have hearing issues. I think that the high school auditorium is easily accessible by people with mobility problems. And so we're making strides in those things. It's an interesting idea to have transportation available more frequently, or I guess we need to advertise that more. I mean, I think we do allow free transportation to anybody who wants it, right? That's my understanding.
I think it's more in the implementation than the, you know, and yeah, and it's not just parents with young children that want to necessarily go home early.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's people that needed transportation to get there. Not going to characterize the people why they might need the transportation as being old or anything like that, but
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for your work. I think it's a very informative study.
David?
Yeah, thank you to all the members of the committee for putting this together. I think there are a number of very good recommendations here. In my opinion, the most important thing at town meeting is the exchange of information, not just the voting. You know, hearing from people that you wouldn't often hear from, and hearing all sides of the things, and getting as many people as possible to participate in that. To that end, I'm really not in favor of remote voting. Should it ever come to that? And you know, for that matter, I'm not that big a fan of representative town meeting. I'd rather do representative town meeting than remote voting, but the towns I know that do representative town meeting have tens of representative. We get hundreds of people, and so our representation is better. And so maybe it's not as good as some towns, but it's better than representative town meeting. Some of the things I you know that we were talking that we do, like I think we have an idea of what articles are going to come what night, but we don't publicize that. At least that I know of. As a citizen, I never saw that, right? So even though we make an assessment as to, you know, we can fit this many articles probably in the first night, and then often the moderator will call for, you know, after that article, say that he or she would take a motion to adjourn to the next night. But we don't publish that fact. So, I have I think getting the information out, you know, some of the things you guys have talked about, I think QR codes are brilliant, you know, and you know, for getting out the pro and con opinions. Boxborough has pro and con opinions in the Warrant, I believe, but we could have pro and con opinions electronically, which would maybe we could do them in the Warrant if that works time-wise, but we could also do them electronically if it didn't work time-wise, and the QR code is, I think, brilliant. I have a few questions. Did you find any tendency to have greater participation if it was on a weekend or something, or was that a wash?
it was a wash. The question was asked, but it wasn't, you know, I forget the exact response, but it was maybe 40% said they might come. It wasn't 50 or 60 said they'd come if it's on a weekend.
And some things like, you know, one of the things that could be done to make the meeting efficient is not only, you know, I'm a little suspicious about putting too much time limit on it, but we could make a judgment as to what we thought the interest was in each article, and put a approximate time, like 15 minutes to discuss this one, 5 minutes to discuss that one, half an hour, 45 minutes to discuss some bigger issue. However, is that automatic call to question? Is that legal? Do we have? Can we invent our own meeting rules?
We've got Ann Chang. I mean, if we set some limits.
But Ann has to get to the front of the microphone.
Sudbury, I believe, may do some actual polling of their citizens before town meeting to see what they're interested in. I'm not quite sure what the vehicle they use to do that is. I'll defer to the moderator on whether, you know, a fixed amount of time is legal. I think to some extent she has to just see how the debate's going. And you don't want to go, oh, that's 15 minutes.
And
there's 40 people in line. You gotta sit down. But on
and
the
I
other
assume
hand,
that any guidelines we try to put on it, like this many articles on the first night, or you know, whatever time limits, that all those would be able to be overridden by town meeting itself.
of course.
Right, so if we set a time limit of 30 minutes and town meeting wanted to spend an hour, they could do that. If we said we had to adjourn by 10, but there was one article left, and we didn't want to come back for a third night, town meeting can extend to 10:15 or whatever it wanted to do.
What we're trying to get across is we believe people want to see a firmer schedule. They want to see, for lack of a better term, important articles taken up between 7 and 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And, you know, if on the second night we still got a bunch of consent articles to take up, well, okay, we'll take them up after 9 or 10 or whenever to get the meeting over. But not, we don't want to see something that a lot of people are interested in, came to discuss, debate, and vote. But
Late.
they have to leave because the babysitting's over, or you know.
Yeah, the housekeeping articles could be at the end of each night. One final question: if it was 2 3-hour nights or 3 2-hour nights, did you get an impression as to what people would prefer?
The math sounds the same to me, Dave. So they just want to.
But some people want to leave by 9, whether it's for kids or they're tired or whatever it is. Some people want to get it over with in as few nights as possible. Was there any?
I don't think we have a real read on that. I think a lot of people come and they stay for the whole session, but then there's constant people coming and going during the night. I've been sitting up on the stage now 15 years, and since when you're on the finance committee, you already know everything that's going to be discussed. You've already talked about it, so it gets a little boring. So you do things like count how many people just left, how many people came in, things like that. But it's pretty much a constant flow during the evening.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comments?
Sure.
One more thing to answer your question, John. I think publicity and education is also a really big thing. I think people who move here, in their 30s and 40s with kids for a job in Boston and aren't from New England and have no idea what town meeting is about, they don't know that it's the legislative action of the town. And Joanne has written a really great kind of introduction to town meeting that hopefully can be incorporated this year. So I think getting that out there in terms that people who aren't lawyers can understand, and publicizing that this happens. People don't know what happens at the same time every year. So I think just getting more education and publicity is also.
Thank you.
A question, please, if I may. Steve, when we talked about having pro and con comments in the warrant, do you envision that being for every article or for select articles?
I would envision it for select articles, and let me say that town council didn't exactly jump at the chance to say we should do that, so we may not be in the warrant. That's the way we phrased the question in the survey, but she had some reservations, not about con arguments, but about con arguments in the warrant.
In terms of the priorities for April, I think most of them we should be able to to easily attain.
I hope we do.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, that's all fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I want to thank this committee. This is a fabulous study. I love how it focused on culture, shifting the culture from, this speak at the public and incorporating the public. And I feel like that's a really important thing that's happening, and I love that. Also, the cuts on the survey, the question and the analysis was really great. So thank you for that. I'll note that I went to a Harvard, Massachusetts town meeting, and they don't allow any slides. So not allowing any slides might speed up presentations, it might be for a future study, but how many people know what they're voting for when they come in the door? That might be interesting. I love the idea of the putting the questions on the ballot, because that will allow people to come in, vote, and leave. So I do hope that we consider that, perhaps for some items, and to take the surveys to understand what should be on consent, what would like a pro and con in the warrant. If other towns can do it, we can do it. But get some information ahead of time about what people think is controversial or not, and what might want to go on a ballot. I thought it was interesting that the recommendations, the short list of recommendations, included something that had a relatively small percentage of response or request for future study. So in particular, the representative town meeting that got like 34%, we should study it, 38%, depending how you look at the numbers. And then the remote participation, so that's a very wide range of 75% versus 40%. So because the representative town meeting with a very low response of interest in such, even in a study of 75% of the people have only gone to 1 or 2 town meetings, I'd like to know whether the committee endorses the idea of representative town meeting, because if they don't, then this is just a wish to have a study. I would like that to be in the report. I would like an evidence of that, because I'm a little bit stung still, because the West Acton sewer project was supposed to be a feasibility study, and we all know what happened there. So I'm a little nervous about things that want to get studied, that then the study committee turns into a full-out advocacy program. So I'd like to ask the committee whether or not, get that on record, whether or not the committee is endorsing the representative town meeting idea with its being 25% of the future study list of recommendations. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
I'd like to get.
Oh, good.
Can you answer the question? Can Steve answer the question? I mean, is this an endorsement of representative town meeting?
It's your meeting.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We did not take a specific vote on any of the things we recommended for future study. As I said earlier, there's 13,000 registered voters at least that we have no information about what they think. The only thing we know about them is they do not come to the open town meeting, which is kind of why we thought maybe there's some merit in looking. Maybe it's some sort of a poll to find out what the level of interest is. The level of interest in representative town meeting, it seems to me, was about the same 10 years ago. It hasn't changed. Like a couple of the selectmen said, I'm not a fan. It's a level of abstraction from democracy in my view. But
Thank you.
so that's it.
Okay.
That's all I get to say.
All right. Town moderator.
Hi, Joanne Berry, Town Moderator. First of all, I would like to thank the committee for doing this work and gathering all this information and having, I think, a pretty good feel of what can be done to help town meeting be a better process for many people. I think I'm willing to do, I've got my list. I'll give you 5 minutes. I can do that. I really do want to push for the 5-minute limit, and I understand that sometimes there will be articles that will require more than that. But I think with practice, people can move to shorter presentations. I would also like to emphasize, I think John said something about it's more of a, or somebody said it was more of a discussion. It's not just about the voting. It's part of an ongoing process, which actually starts right after town meeting ends. It's an ongoing community and consensus discussion, which I think a lot of people aren't particularly aware of. And so that's where I think some of the information getting out there, even if the budget isn't final till just before the meeting, if folks know, here's where we started, here's where we are, that this has been an ongoing back and forth process with a lot of people participating, you feel much more up to date if you've been able to follow along easily than if you show, you get your warrant and it's like, oh, how did they get to that number? If it's more, and I know all the meetings are open, I know all the material is available on the website, but there are improvements to be made. I don't know what they are, but there's some way for people to feel like they can get to the information and use it and understand the process better. Oh, and I will say, Nina Pickering Cook, our town council, did come to one of the meetings, and she said, you know, she works with several towns, and she said, we do pretty well. That she's not concerned. She's glad that we're concerned for ourselves, but she's not particularly concerned that we're going to hell in a handbasket over the way we run town meeting. I do like having the family-friendly overflow room. I think that will help quite a few folks with babies, little kids, somebody who just wants to sprawl. And if we kind of make that part of the culture, then I think that will make it more comfortable for a certain group of people to come. I like scheduling articles within a range. Certainly, we're not going to cut off debate if there's still plenty of people who have something to add. If it gets repetitive, that's another matter. But if there's more to add to the discussion or questions, I think that will also help take the edge off the push. It's like, we can get this done tonight if we just keep hammering away. So let's schedule stuff out so people can organize themselves. And it's not just people with kids. I mean, if you know you can go and sit for one night, you can choose. Or you know you got 45 minutes, you can choose. Establish firm adjourn time or take up new business. I'd be more in favor of don't take up any new business time. And with the way the warrant is set up right now, I think that will work fairly well. People in the room will always have more voice than people who aren't in the room. That's just the way it goes. But if that's the expectation, we'll go to this point and then stop and then start up tomorrow with the thing that everybody wants to come for tomorrow. If we establish that culture, I think the meeting will be more accessible and more people will be interested in participating. I think that's pretty much what I have. That's why I ran, was to make the meeting more accessible and make it more so that more people would be willing to participate to the level that they're able. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks again to the committee.
How do you want to leave it? I was the liaison to the committee, and I just want to thank all of you for a job very well done. I'm happy to work with John and Mark and the moderator to implement as much as we can of the priorities for April over the next couple of weeks. So,
Well, we have a couple of more items on the agenda for town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people are here for the intersection? And how many people are here for Strawberry Hill Road? Okay. I was trying to decide whether we should go through the warrant, all the warrant articles now, or whether we could do the...
Do that after.
Do that after.
Yeah, let's do that after. So let's go to Main and Prospect Street.
So this is Corey York and the Public Works Department Engineering have been working on several intersections over the last few years, and tonight we're going to be presenting updates on 2 of the intersection projects and then a few of the other road safety audits that we've been working on. So, Corey, thanks.
Excuse me, but if you're in the back and want to come forward to see the maps.
Thank you. My name's Corey York. I'm the DPW director. Just to give a quick intro into the project, we can get moving on the concepts. The town as a whole has been looking at safety of the streets, the intersections, things like that. And as we look at sort of our accident data, Main and Prospect sort of ranked high on the list. So we looked a little more into trying to do a feasibility study of how to evaluate the issues out there and come up with some recommended alternatives to see how to improve upon it. And then we held some public forums to kind of go through all the pros and cons and come up with a sort of a preferred alternative. So in working with that process, the town partnered with niche engineering to help us go through the collection of data and public input, sort of pulling all that together to come up with some designs that were workable for this area. So I'll hand it over to niche engineering now so they can just kind of go through the options and talk about the process that we went through.
Thank you, Corey. My name is John Mikulak. I'm a senior project manager at Niche Engineering. And as Corey mentioned, we were contracted by the town to conduct an existing conditions analysis of the main Route 27 and Prospect Street intersection. And the second part of our work was to look at some concept designs and make a recommendation. I do want to mention that the concept plans that I'll be presenting tonight were also included in the report that we submitted to the town, and I believe that they are still all available on the town's website. So I apologize if you can't see clearly any of the boards I brought tonight, but they are available online. So we started our analysis with site visits to observe some of the issues ourselves that we saw happening at the intersection. We also conducted traffic counts and turning movement counts in May of 2018. Prospect Street, there's two legs of Prospect Street, the one to the north and one to the south, and there's a wide expanse of pavement with a very long crosswalk through the middle of the intersection. So we observed several issues with cars being unable to pull out onto Main Street without having to wait for a considerable amount of time. We also note that there are two separate stop lines or stop signs on Prospect Street coming from the north. We observed some vehicles used one and not the other. Some very few vehicles used both of the stop signs. So all in all, it seemed very chaotic at times, especially during rush hour at this intersection. So before we started looking at any concepts, we held a public information meeting of June of 2018, and it was very well attended. And we wanted to hear from the residents and the neighbors and anybody that was interested what they thought the issues were at this intersection. Some of the things that were brought up involved cut-through traffic on Prospect Street through the southern leg, speeding along Prospect Street, difficulties in pulling out onto Main Street, as well as some trucks using this to turn around and also driving up on people's lawns. So we understood there were several issues. So then what we proceeded to do was look at several concepts, different variations of the concepts, trying to address each of the individual issues that the residents brought to our attention and that we had seen while we were out there. So to go through a couple of the concepts that we studied. The first concept we looked at didn't involve any signals or any major geometric changes. What we did note is that vehicles were having difficulty pulling out from the two different legs of Prospect Street. So we proposed some geometric improvements, focused all of the traffic to exit the southern leg on Prospect Street. So cars traveling southbound from the north Prospect Street leg would travel down, and then all the vehicles would be entering Main Street from the same node. And at least that would improve the expectation of drivers. They would know where cars would be pulling out, while also eliminating that wide expanse of pavement that was causing confusion. So taking that concept one more step further, we looked at the possibility of separating the two Prospect Street legs. And again, there wouldn't be any proposed signals or any changes to Main Street, but it would create two distinct points of access and egress from Main Street on either side of Prospect. Again, this improves some of the safety issues that were experienced with that sea of pavement, but it doesn't help the ability of vehicles to pull out onto Main Street when Main Street is busy. So a third concept that we looked at was the roundabout concept, and as a requirement of any MassDOT project, if this was to be go forward as a Mass DOT project in the future, they require that all intersections at least be studied for the feasibility of a roundabout. The issues with this particular location and a roundabout is that there isn't enough room to fit a standard roundabout in the center without impacting the property to the east and to the west of Main Street. So what we did was we created some geometry. It's basically two separate roundabouts. And what roundabouts do is they encourage slower traffic. So each of the approaches into the roundabout from each of the legs, from Main Street and from each leg on Prospect Street, encourages slower traffic. They're narrower entrances, and they also have shorter crosswalks across them, which also improves safety for pedestrians attempting to cross at these locations, because they're only looking in one direction at a time and crossing one lane of traffic. So that's another benefit of roundabouts. But again, we ran into difficulty fitting in the standard roundabout, so we came up with this figure 8 shaped roundabout. The brick truck apron, that's used so that large trucks can drive over a mountable curb and make the turning movement. So we did make sure that trucks would be able to navigate this path of travel, but again, vehicles would stay on the gray asphalt area and continue to travel slower as they proceed around the roundabout. This actually had the best impact on traffic. It slows traffic down, but it doesn't require traffic on Main Street to stop completely, and they would yield to drivers within the roundabout, so it'd be easier for access from either leg of Prospect Street to enter into the roundabout. And the fourth concept that we looked at involves a traffic signal. The traffic signal would control traffic coming from both legs of Prospect Street, from the north and to the south. It would have defined crosswalks for pedestrians. It would provide a continuous sidewalk on both sides of the intersection. The phasing would allow for traffic to travel each direction on Main Street, would allow for a separate phase for each of the Prospect Street legs to enter onto Main Street. And then the fifth phase would be an exclusive pedestrian phase. So if a pedestrian pushed the pedestrian push button, they'd get their own phase. All traffic would stop so that pedestrians could cross the street safely. So this also works from a traffic perspective. It ends up having a overall level of service D based on the traffic analysis. And what you want to have is a level of service D or better is an acceptable level of service for an intersection. But it would create some traffic queuing to allow for the Prospect Street phases and the pedestrian phase. So cars would back up on Main Street while they're at a red light, while they're waiting for a green light. But during most phases, all of that traffic would be able to cycle through, which is why it's given a level of service D. So it wouldn't create excessive backups, but cars would have to wait for their turn to progress through the intersection. That being said, we ended up presenting these concepts at another public information meeting in December of 2018. Again, it was well attended. We had a lot of feedback on these options. I think the general consensus at that meeting is that the residents wanted to see something done that would improve safety. We did explain that the roundabout did have a more favorable level of service, a level of service C, so traffic would flow better on Main Street. We also feel that would be as safe an option as the signalized intersection. But we did get some feedback from the public that the signal would be more acceptable. It's more common. People know how to navigate a traffic signal as opposed to a roundabout, especially one that's irregular shaped like the one that we fit in this area. We did solicit town comments, and one comment that we did get from public safety officials in town was that their preference was the signalized intersection as well, because the signalized intersection could include emergency preemption, which is used by emergency vehicles, so they can control the signal so that they can activate a green signal while they're traveling through and push traffic along so that they can get through quicker. So they felt that they would be able to have more control over the signal, which they're used to for their emergency response times. So that was the summary of the concepts. We think both the roundabout option and the signal option, are both viable options. But given the feedback we got from the residents as well as public safety, we recommended further study for a traffic signal at this location to improve safety.
Thank you. Corey, do you have anything to add?
That pretty much sums up everything that we did through the study. We kind of want to just give an update as far as where we are now, those recommendations. So.
Officer Kogan, anything?
Nothing yet.
Okay. Dean?
Thank you. I guess one of the questions I'd have is, what would be the cost of the various options? I imagine a full signalized intersection would be fairly expensive.
Both the roundabout and the intersection would probably have similar costs. We didn't do a cost estimate. We haven't done the survey and figured out exactly where the property lines are. This is all conceptual and based on GIS mapping, but the way prices are coming in for signalized or intersections or roundabouts, it's probably between $1 and $2 million overall for a full construction cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
John?
No.
Peter?
We already have excessive backups on Route 27. By the way, first of all, let me just recommend that you bring a PowerPoint presentation if you come to these presentations. We're on TV. We have people here who are interested in seeing these. We have them online, and they're accessible online, so we can see them easily, but certainly it would be nice to have a PowerPoint to display them up here. But
I apologize. I hadn't been to this room, so I didn't.
Yeah, okay. Did you consider, have you know what's happening in Kelly's Corner? I mean, have you considered wait times if you put in a light? We have a light, just down at the bridge. If you try to get through there between 5 and 6 o'clock, your wait time is 15 minutes. And then you get as far as Kelly's Corner and you wait another 15 minutes. So what would putting a signalized light do into these stop times, wait times?
Well, during rush hour, the analysis shows that you'd have to wait for one traffic signal cycle. So you're probably waiting another 90 seconds to get through. But the reason for that is to allow the people, to safely come out onto Main Street from Prospect Street. So that would be the reason.
And that's based on the traffic flows, the studies of the numbers of cars that go through.
Correct. Yeah, we did traffic counts, and they're based on the peak hour.
Yeah. I keep hearing that we're going to have these electric vehicles that's going to make 3/4 of the cars on the road disappear. You see that happening at any time in the near future?
It's hard to predict. I know that with technology moves in leaps and bounds, and I wonder the same thing if I'm going to see it in my lifetime. But
okay,
I think
but
there's
that's
a lot
not part of any of your analysis. So you can't depend on it.
No, we've been asked that before too, but it's so up in the air with regulations and infrastructure.
Yeah,
it's hard to predict.
I see on the stoplight one, dedicated bike lanes. I think you're talking about, there was a word that I didn't understand for the other. There's not enough room for a bike lane with the roundabout, a dedicated bike lane. I don't see any bike lane on the roundabout.
Right.
I guess you've got a picture of a bicycle traveling along. There was a word with an S, that a bike something. Cheryl. Okay, so what's that?
So sharrows are the it's like a diamond shaped chevron in advance of a bicycle that lets vehicles know that they're sharing this lane with bicycles, and let bicycles know that they're allowed to ride on this road.
Okay, so that's a share the
Right.
road.
It's when you don't have enough room for a separated bicycle lane or bike facility.
So with the roundabout, you have the sharrows. And
on the
and
approaches.
With the stoplights, you had a dedicated bike lane. Because we have a bike lane there now.
Right. Yep, that's true. With the roundabouts, the thought is with a single lane roundabout that speeds are slow enough that bikes would feel comfortable also riding through there with cars. The other thing that we would look at or recommend, if it's desired, is you can widen the sidewalk out to be an 8 or a 10-foot wide shared use path. So then what you can do is have a ramp where a bike can get up onto that wider sidewalk and then travel, and then they can get back down into the bike lane on the other side. Again, we didn't survey the property lines, so we were trying to keep everything to make sure that we aren't showing any impacts to private property as part of the concepts. But I think when you get into the actual design and you actually have survey data and you've tied down the property lines, you'll be able to better see what can fit in there, and then maybe you can put a wider facility in there that bicycles and pedestrians can share.
So on that roundabout going east and west, is there enough room for, say a car wants to go around and go down, is coming north on 27 and wants to take a left onto Prospect? And has to stop because there's vehicles coming south on 27.
Actually,
it's just like a regular roundabout, right? You gotta yield to the ones that are coming into the intersection. Is there enough room for another car to get by them on the right-hand side?
Actually, the vehicles need to yield to the vehicles that are already within the roundabout. So the car that's in the roundabout.
So it's not expected to be waiting there to take that left-hand turn.
Right. Right. The car wouldn't be stopped in the roundabout. Roundabouts are designed so that they flow slowly, but everybody keeps moving. That's why it doesn't create the same backups on.
If you try to get through the Concord Rotary, you could question that that concept also.
Yeah.
Well, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Rotaries are different.
David?
Yeah, hi. I have a few questions. Does this intersection meet the traffic counts, et cetera, now for a signal?
Yes, it did. Yep, it met the 8-hour warrant, the 4-hour warrant, and the peak hour warrant. So it does meet signal warrants.
And what are the delays coming in from Prospect now at rush hours? Right, how long do people wait to take a left turn out of one of the Prospects?
Geez, I don't know if I have that number off the top of my head.
So
it could be a long time, because some vehicles, we found some of the residents don't feel comfortable pulling out. A lot of them said they have to wait for somebody to stop and let them out. So I think the gaps were very few and far between for that. So people, I think the analysis showed that they're waiting for a long time. I don't have the number off the top of my head though.
There are other Main Street intersections that in my opinion are more in need of a traffic signal than this one. I drive through this intersection regularly. I do not have a problem turning left or right. At rush hour I might have to wait 45 seconds or a minute, but I might have to wait 45 seconds or a minute for a light. I really don't have a problem. So I think a signal light is overkill here myself. In your first proposal, the description says, among other things, turning movements from the southeast bound Prospect Street onto Main Street are not accommodated. That's the first thing you proposed. Is that, if I'm understanding, if you're coming from Route 111, you cannot turn onto Main Street in that proposal? Am I understanding that correctly? Or you just have to go
to the southern leg. That was
so
anybody traveling Prospect Street in the southern direction can't come out this way. We're forcing everybody to come out and exit on this southern node. So, yes, yeah.
Yeah, that actually makes sense to me. To me, some flavor of this seems more appropriate than your other proposals. Again, I think that the traffic light is not called for here. I just don't see that. There's two other intersections on Main Street that are much more dicey to pull out of than this one. Much more. The roundabout concept, as Peter was pointing out, is less accommodating of cyclists and things like that. I think this one is actually quite good. I would consider possibly doing flashing beacons for the crosswalks, but other than that, I like this one myself. I wanted to verify that people could actually get out onto Main Street. When this statement here worried me. It just means that you can't get onto Main Street directly.
At this
you just
point
have to
here.
go around the island, which is
Right. Yep.
fine. And I think it's pretty rare that someone comes that way and turns left onto Main Street, and so they may turn right onto Main Street coming from that way, but it's rare that they turn left. So I like this one myself.
Okay. Are there any other comments?
Hi, my name is Meg Schreer and I live
Can you
at-
stand up to the
Yep,
mic?
sorry. I live at Main Street in Prospect, so we've kind of always done our own little analysis, but I can tell you we've been there about 4.5 years, the traffic in the last year and a half has increased at Kelly's Corner and the train station. My husband takes the train. And so to me, having any lights there or a roundabout, as well as having young children, is just gonna make the traffic even worse and not safe. The other thing that wasn't put in this analysis is the buses that go down Prospect Street. 20 buses, and the backup that's going to be when all the students in Acton now have about a 45-minute bus ride one way. 45 minutes for a kindergartner on a bus to 6th grade or whatever is really long, and we're just going to add to it when we add a roundabout or a light. So the safety part of also, I would never bring my children through a roundabout, and I know plenty of people in our neighborhood would not feel comfortable. Even trying to go across the street now, people do stop, but you're usually out there for about 5 minutes until someone stops. So by having a roundabout, I just think of people going even faster to go through, and that makes me really nervous. I do like the first one the best. I think it's the safest and easiest, especially with all the families that are moving into our neighborhood. So I do think that's the one that looks good and then would be less of a traffic jam, which is, as you both talked about, really busy.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, thanks. My name is Mike Broberg. I live next door on Prospect Street, right by the southern node of the intersection, or the cut-through, as it is called in the report. I'd just like to say I've liked option one from the get-go. To David's point, I agree with a lot of what you said. I've never liked the rotary. It would, my wife and I moved here 2 years ago, and we made the decision to live near Route 27, but not on 27, and it would essentially funnel all the southbound traffic right by our front door, which I was not expecting when we moved here. And the other thing I would like to question is this idea that this design for the roundabout is safer. In the traffic study that was done in 2018, it was noted that people drive an average of 7 miles over the speed limit on Route 27, which, like, I know it doesn't sound like much, but the posted speed limit is 35. And the idea of getting people to drive more slowly in that roundabout just doesn't seem like reasonable to me. I don't believe people are going to do it if they're already, violating the speed limit like that. So anyway, option one would be great, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. So I was really excited about the roundabout. I was looking at oh, hey, we're in Europe now, hey. As opposed to like the Kelly's Corner Sculpture Park. But but after talking to these guys, I am totally on their side. I feel like the light, it would both be expensive, it would be longer crosswalks for pedestrians. I feel like there's more speeding. They see that light and they gun it. I got stopped the other day for going the speed limit because nobody goes the speed limit, the cops said. So I feel like that we don't want to be encouraging car traffic or being car-centric in any fashion. Also, lights mean idling, so idling in front of their windows. It's also, for me, an environmental justice issue, that if these guys who live there and breathe this place and see it and walk it want a section, option one, I'm all in favor of option one. I believe that it is probably cheaper. And we could at least try it and see how it works, especially at town meeting. There's going to be a vote, apparently, to adopt the state law to allow towns to decrease numbered highway speed limits to 25 miles an hour. So everybody come and vote for that, I hope. And so that, in combination with option one, I hope that that's the solution you choose. Thank you.
Thank you. More.
Hi, John Edmonds, West Acton. Risk versus cost. I haven't heard anyone say that. I go through that intersection 12, 14 times a week. I bicycle through it a couple times. Lines of sight are terrible. People drive too fast, right? The idea of a light I find very appealing. I know stopping for a traffic light is an inconvenience, all right? Picking up injured people off the road is a tragedy, all right? And I don't hear anybody saying that. And that kind of disturbs me, all right? I think that $1 million or $2 million, Dean, that's kind of vague. I gotta admit, it's really sort of vague, and it seems like a lot of money. But if someone's killed there because cars aren't slowing down from 45 miles an hour, which they sometimes drive past the mobile station, right? And, I was born in the first half of the last century. Sometimes on my bike, I space out a little, okay? I'm afraid sometimes. I'm always afraid there, all right? And I think that a light would create a safety situation that would be worth the fact that you might have to sit there a little longer. There's been no analysis, has there, about coordinating the lights? If you're gonna sit for 15 minutes at Kelly's Corner, who knows? Maybe if you sit at the light at Prospect, it'd cost you 5 minutes. And when you get to Kelly's Corner, the line's shorter because nobody's in it, because you sat there for a little while. See, we don't know this, but I do know that every single time I come down Prospect from towards the train station, and I have to try to look back over my shoulder to 27 to see if somebody's gonna make a left, when the person at the stop sign on Prospect coming the other way can't see down 27 because the sign for the gas station is in the way, all right, because the line of sight is terrible there, right? That's not a pleasant thing. And I would feel a lot better as an Acton resident if I thought I could just kind of come up there and go, oh, all this is laid out logically. There's ways to make people stop if they need to stop, right? I understand you want to save money, all right, but you just got to ask yourself, well, what am I saving money and what am I going to get in return? Any serious accidents at that intersection?
It's always.
Yeah, all right. I don't know. I look for litter. I look for car litter on the ground, like at the Rotary at MCI Concord, where there's always parts of cars on the ground. I don't see too much car litter around there, but it's a very serious accident waiting to happen the way it is. And if you don't manage traffic meaningfully, I just don't think it's going to be safe enough. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ask a question of the consultant about option one and what the gentleman just said.
Tara, we have a lot on the agenda.
I just want to know if option one would take care of the safety concerns that he was talking about. Thank you.
So option one does address, sorry. Option one does address the issue of the wide expansive pavement, the chaos where people aren't sure where to stop when they need to pull out. So both option one and option two were less costly. They did address some of those conflicts, but the only thing that they don't do is make it easier for people to pull out onto Main Street from either leg of Prospect Street.
Thank you. Franny?
Hi, I'm Franny Osmond, Half Moon Hill. I just wanted to put in a plug for things that slow down traffic. It's funny, when I saw the figure 8, when I saw the rotary, I thought, oh good, it will slow down traffic, so I sort of liked that. But then lights even more. And after hearing that other comment about lights and about the difficulty of bicycling through there, I mean, I sort of agree about that focus on safety. And the more we slow down traffic, better.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on Prospect intersection? Can we go to Strawberry Hill and come back to this?
You could come back to it. The consultant's recommendations are before you, and we can continue to think about those recommendations, or we could choose one to move forward on. So
Okay.
it's at the board's pleasure.
All right, well, why don't we think about it and hear Strawberry Hill?
Do you want him to stay?
Good evening. My name is Bob Stathopoulos. I'm a senior traffic engineer with Howard Stein Hudson, and I have Ashley Pierre-Louis with us from our office as well. I worked with Corey in the engineering department of the city of Acton, the town of Acton, sorry, on two different road safety audits. One is the Strawberry Hill Road, as you mentioned before. The other one was Hayward Road. The first one, Strawberry Hill Road, was completed in 2018. The second one was Hayward Road was completed in 2019. All the information I'll present tonight, and also towards the end where I have some of those slides that show the recommendations we provided, short and long term, are also available in the reports that were in your own notice for the meeting tonight and on your website as well. So what I'll go through tonight is a little bit of the history, what we did, the information that we provided with, what we did to compile additional information and help complete the report, what the safety issues we saw out there as we went did our own observations, the information that we gathered from the two public hearings that we had, one for the Strawberry Hill Road safety audit, and the other one for the Hayward Road road safety audit. And then like I said, the few slides at the end are the short-term and long-term recommendations for either corridor. So going first through Strawberry Hill Road, the town had provided us with some past studies that were done on collecting information about the speeds driving down Strawberry Hill Road. And the other one was a list of citizens' complaints for the safety along the roadway, how people are driving using the whole width of the roadway instead of staying on one lane or the other. The big thing was, I guess, the cut-through traffic, as people can use Strawberry Hill Road coming from Great Road to head eastbound and towards Boston, let's say, because of the Concord Rotary being backed up, and vice versa on the way back home. So, like I mentioned, we had the history of speeding, parking along Strawberry Hill Road, the drivers encroaching on the opposing travel lane, the three intersections within our study area that I will show in the next slide of Great Road, Esterbrook Road, and Pope Road have one of those old geometries that you don't really see too much today, which we call Y intersections, and incomplete and non-existent pedestrian and bicycle accommodations along this corridor. For Hayward Road, again, the same studies done by the town showed the speeding along the roadway. We had the citizen complaints on safety, mostly now about the children. We have the Acton Boxborough Regional High School on basically the center of Hayward Road, and there's a lot of kids that walk and even bike down this road as well. And I believe there was one or two children during when we did the study, they got hit at the crosswalk with Jefferson Road, and I think also Hayward Road at Main Street. There was another child that was hit there. And finally, we've noticed in a few areas, though there were wheelchair ramps there, they seem to be a bit substandard for kids that walk there, and I think there were kids that were either disabled or on a wheelchair. So our project area for Strawberry Hill Road, or study area, included the corridor from Great Road all the way to the Concord Town line. And as I mentioned, we had the three major intersections along the whole corridor: Great Road, Esserbrook Road, and Pope Road. You go to the next one. Again, the major things that we saw over here in our own observations were the roadway curves. The road has quite a few curves, and then combined with the utilities and the trees that are just almost right up against the pavement, if not right there. And there are a few brooks along the way too. Creates a constrained roadway, quite a few curves to navigate around, and even the trees and the utilities there, they're a little bit tough to see around some of those curves, but yet we still see a lot of people driving pretty fast down that road. And the arrows that I showed on that slide were again that cut through traffic that I mentioned earlier. Existing issues: the geometry, the speeding, cut through traffic, parking along the roadway that was mentioned a few times, and the pedestrian and bicycle recommendations. Now, I should be clear, there is a path or a sidewalk for part of Strawberry Hill Road. It starts closer to Pope Road, if not in the middle of Strawberry Hill Road, between Esserbrook and Pope Road, and then just wraps around Pope Road and goes down Pope Road. But there's no way for anybody to cross Pope Road or even Strawberry Hill Road to go in either direction on Pope Road or across the street on the other side to Strawberry Hill Road and into Concord. For the bicycle commendation, sorry, I forgot to mention, I know there is a summer event, I forget the name of it, but a lot of bicycles do use Strawberry Hill Road in the summer as a route to go back and forth, do a big ride apparently. Over to Hayward Road now and its safety issues. First off, the study area. We started from Arlington Street. It included the Arlington Street all the way to Main Street. The intersection of Hayward Road and Main Street are colored differently because the town engineering department had also asked us to do some traffic counts there and check again if the signal warrants were met. We had done a study back in 2007 for this one intersection only, Hayward Road and Main Street. We found back then the traffic signal warrants were met. Today, even more so, as traffic seemed to have increased a little bit more. On to the next one. The characteristics for Hayward Road, almost similar with Strawberry Hill Road when it comes to roadway curves. We see them along the way, and you can see around where I have those orange colored lines where the roadway curves are right there, more pronounced. There is a sidewalk path on Hayward Road. It kind of discontinues on the first driveway of the high school, but there is a crosswalk there and another crosswalk farther down, so there's plenty of connection right in front of the high school. And we've heard quite a few concerns with the solar glare on the road, and especially coming over the bridge with Route 2, and there is also the Jefferson Road crosswalk right there. So that's where we heard a lot of that solar glare complaints. And ADA compliance has to do with some of those wheelchair ramps that we saw to be a little bit substandard. The safety issues we noticed, and again what we heard, was the roadway geometry of the road itself, having those curves, speeding along Hayward Road. School is only in session specific hours of the day, but they have the extracurricular activities outside of school hours, and the speeding still happens on those hours as well. So that's a concern basically for the whole day for this roadway. And pedestrian and bicycle accommodations, pedestrians more for the crosswalks that the speeding really is detrimental to. So we had to figure out how to pronounce more of those crosswalks and increase the safety for them. Bicycle accommodations, we've noticed kids biking more so on the sidewalk, but we've seen some people being on the road as well. So it seems there is some biking needs on these roads, but there's nothing provided, no pavement markings to say bicycle can be there, or a sign, or even a bicycle lane. So at the public hearings, I've mentioned a few things already before. We heard the need for crosswalks at Strawberry Hill Road. More signs on Strawberry Hill Road, there are not enough there. There's a few that went up for restriction on parking. The speed limit signs are also up there, but that's about it. I think this road could benefit from a few more signs myself. Sight lines at Pope Road intersection was a big thing. Really tough to see if you're on Strawberry Hill Road trying to enter Pope Road, especially if you're coming from Concord. Those corners are really tough to see around due to the trees that are there and the curvature of Pope Road as well. And we also heard concerns for some of the improvements that I'll show later to be able to be implemented on Strawberry Hill Road because it's historic and scenic road. At the level that we did this study, we were looking more into the safety issues that the corridor has and what could be done to improve upon that safety. We never really got into too much detail. Everything is really a high-level analysis for the safety of the corridor and how we could improve it with a few general measures. So we never really went down into too much detail to check how much we were allowed to do on a historic roadway. For Hayward Road, we heard those accidents involving school children and school children safety in general, as I mentioned before, and it's another roadway that's used as a shortcut as Strawberry Hill Road is. And these are the short-term and long-term concepts that we put together for the town, and they're in the report. We don't have a little more of a high level, or more of a, I should say, closer level into the roadway of how these improvements will look. We kind of shaded out the areas that will be impacted by either doing tree clearing and maybe just the general clearing out the branches, where we could provide additional signage. This is the short term for Strawberry Hill Road, so we show more signage for curve warnings and the speeds you should go around those curves. The Y intersection signs, where any stop signs could be retained or replaced if they're old. Street name signs, there's quite little street name signs. There are not enough there, so we should try to provide more if possible. You can go to the next one. I did not go there. There you go. And over here to the eastern end of the project with Pope Road, we thought that it'd be a good idea short term to close off that slip lane from Pope Road that enters into Strawberry Hill Road going westbound and towards Great Road. It seemed to be an area where people can make a turn going in high speeds. And some additional tree clearing or branch clearing around this corner to help for now, for the short term, increase a little bit the visibility. And on top of that, some of those flashing speed signs that warn you how fast you're going and how fast you should be going, especially for this intersection that has really limited sight distances. Moving over to the long term, we're looking into those geometry improvements at the Y intersections. The green corners that you can see, if you can see them up there, for Great Road and Strawberry Hill Road, we're making it a traditional T intersection. No more any of that splitting of the roadway going around the median, and people don't know which side of that island they need to be in order to access Great Road or vice versa. So this makes a more traditional T intersection. You come up to a single stop line from Strawberry Hill Road, trying to access either taking a left onto Great Road or right to go up north. And same thing for Great Road. They just have one access point to get onto Strawberry Hill Road. And the same idea is for Esterbrook Road there as well. Signage is pretty much the same as the short term. The few additional ones here are the speed humps that we thought could help benefit this roadway when we're talking about slowing down the speeds that people are driving over here. That's something that should be talked to, though, because I think when it comes to emergency vehicles, that's a little bit detrimental to them. It does increase a little bit their travel times, the response times, but it's nothing to the extent that will be completely out of the picture, but that depends to each emergency department that we talk to. When it comes to plowing, they can be designed in ways that they're not going to be detrimental to the plows themselves. They can still clean the roadway without a problem. So the purple line over here denotes the actual existing sidewalk that's out there today on Strawberry Hill Road. So we were trying to connect to this one with a proposed sidewalk that we're showing in orange, and now it started over from Great Road, and we tried to connect Great Road all the way to Pope Road on Strawberry Hill Road over here. So that's that existing sidewalk. And I think the signs are pretty much the same from the short term. If you can go to the next one. Back to the intersection with Pope Road, we're actually recommending to close down that slip lane from Pope to Strawberry Hill Road and reclaim it as green space. That'd be perfect for that. And Corey over here informed me that there's a possibility of the bottom right corner, the property there with a stone wall. That wall may be moving. I think that's still in talks with the town. So that's that's good news for people trying to get out of that side of Strawberry Hill Road, as we can increase a little bit of side distance. So that's going to happen. But at this point, we just showed again just cutting out any branches that are in the way. We didn't have that information when we developed this long-term plan. Moving over to Hayward Road. The purple/pink coloring there is that existing sidewalk, and that pretty much stays as it is today, because I think we have some hills on one side of the road of Hayward Road that you wouldn't be able to install a sidewalk unless you start doing some earthwork there. And there's also all the trees and the utilities you have to consider about cutting down and moving on that side. But you see more signage around a lot of your crosswalks that you already have out there, but these are just additional ones to provide additional warning for the existing crosswalks. If you can go to the next one. When we go getting closer to the school, I believe at that time Corey had mentioned to me that there's a plan to put a sidewalk on Charter Road as it wraps around Hayward Road and going towards the west, towards Arlington Street. So there'll be a sidewalk that we can connect to, and connect the existing crosswalks as well to provide more complete accommodations for pedestrians and anybody else that walks around there, or even for the kids that we've seen biking on the sidewalk because they felt more safe to do that. And we also, around the high school, we thought we can provide some more pronounced crosswalks. It shows as orange over here. We were thinking it can be a stamped colored concrete, either red or orange, just something to make it pop out more, so when drivers come through this area they can see there's a crosswalk. If the signs are not enough, at least that should grab their attention. And along the whole corridor as well, we're showing, then a little bit tough to see, sharrows, the bicycle shared markings for the roadway, where people the bicyclists can share the road with vehicles. Now we're at the Jefferson Road, where already the town has signs that show that there is a crosswalk right there. They're pretty brand new when we did the road safety audit. What we are showing here is a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, the RFB, in order to tell drivers they need to stop if there's a pedestrian that needs to cross this crosswalk. And I think that's very important for that one, especially when we heard a lot of complaints about the specific crosswalk and not being very safe for anybody to use, especially the children.
That's at Jefferson Road?
Excuse me, Jefferson Road, yes. Over to the long term, similar idea to what we have with the short term. We were thinking about additional branch clearing, and if there's any smaller trees that are able to remove, I think depending on the size, you start getting into environmental concerns. You're going to be able to remove bigger trees, but any smaller trees that we can remove, that's what the darker green line is on the plans. The sidewalks are still there and the crosswalks are still there. We're proposing them as we did for the short term, along with the curve warning signs as they were in the short term as well. You can go to the next one. The addition to this long-term plan was bicycle lanes. Wherever we can fit them on the whole corridor. I think we had enough width for this road, on this road. At some points, I believe it did get up to 40 feet. Some roads it got a little bit narrower, so that's where if you couldn't continue, those 5-foot bicycle lanes would go back to shallows. But we had a good length of this corridor. We can provide an actual bicycle lane, so bicycles can be out of the travel lane with the vehicles. But most of these recommendations are pretty similar to the short term. If you can go to the next one. Yep, the Jefferson Road, again, we're showing the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. We showed it on both the short term and the long term because it was a need for that crosswalk at Jefferson Road to be safer. So the RFB could be something that can be implemented right away and can be implemented separately from the entire corridor plan over here. That's pretty much in a nutshell what we had in both of those reports. So the reports are pretty robust on what we observed with our own studies, what we heard from people from the public hearings, what they liked and they didn't like are also in those reports as well. But again, keep in mind it was pretty high level. The only counts we did was Hayward and Main Road, and only to check Main Street, in order to check if the traffic signal warrants were met, not to do any other analysis to see how the traffic signal will work there, or if a roundabout may work there, or any other option. Any questions? I can
Thank
answer.
you. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. I was very impressed with the changes you're suggesting for Strawberry Hill Road, especially the elimination of those Y intersections. They're just really antiquated. They were great with a horse and buggy, but they don't work any longer. And the other changes to Strawberry Hill, I think, are all great. I'd be in favor of moving ahead with those. Hayward Road, pretty much the same sort of thing. I think one of the biggest improvements is one that you didn't really address, is looking very seriously at the improvement in the intersection of Hayward Road and Main Street. There was consideration years ago at putting a signal there, and certainly I think I agree with some of the other selectmen that there are better places to put a traffic signal than Prospect and Main, and that would be Hayward and Main. So I'd hope to see some work done on that in the future. Thank you.
John?
Yes, was a piece of the Strawberry Hill project designed to deal with the parking and traffic around the Rapscallion?
Yes, so in the long-term option, the plans do not show it very well over here, but what was in the report showed that we looked at, I think it was about 3 to 4 parking spaces that were very close to the intersection of the Great Road. We didn't look into going into farther down Strawberry Hill Road, as we heard that concern from the abutters, basically, that they didn't really like the parking on Strawberry Hill Road, and that's why there are also signs over there as well. So we looked at a few spaces right there, right against, adjacent to the property, Rapscallion property. But knowing that they're already using the supermarket on Great Road parking lot, and I believe there was a crosswalk that was installed recently on Great Road to help make that connection from the supermarket on Strawberry Hill Road, we felt that just providing a few more spaces right there at the intersection and having the owner keep using the supermarket made more sense instead of trying to create parking on Strawberry Hill Road where it's not really wanted as it sounds.
Thank you.
Peter?
Is there a divider on Strawberry Hill Road, a stripe down the center?
Nothing
road?
today. Nothing today. And in our plans, we were proposing to put the double yellow center line, as it will really help on the drivers encroaching into the opposing travel lane. That is something again we need to look into more again with the historic and scenic road. What are we actually allowed to do? It's only paint that we're putting down on the road, but we really need to look if that's something that's frowned upon on a historic road as well.
Okay, do those have to be yellow, or can they be white?
Well,
Some
yellow
roads, they're
denotes the opposing direction. White does not.
Okay.
White more the way the white line is used today denotes the edge of the road where
Right.
on your right side.
Okay.
David?
Yes, I agree with Dean that I think all the changes proposed for Strawberry Hill Road are good. I agree with all of them. And I agree with the ones proposed for Hayward Road as well. It was not clear to me whether you were proposing flashing beacons at just Jefferson or both Charter and Jefferson. I think it would be important to have them at both of those intersections. You know, I walk a lot, and my experience with the flashing beacons is very, very positive. You know, people get in their mindset on their commutes or whatever, and you know, and they're not always looking for pedestrians, and the flashing beacons do a great job, especially, you know, at night. And so when students leave their extracurriculars at 4:30 in the winter, you know, the cars may not see them as well. I think, in fact, the flashing beacons are more important than you know, the orange pavement myself. You know, there's nothing wrong with the orange pavement, but if I had to spend money one in place or the other, I'd rather spend it on the flashing beacons. I also agree with Dean that Hayward and Maine is definitely, in my mind, a candidate for a traffic light. Not only is it very difficult for cars and buses to turn left there because Main Street northbound is 2 lanes, and so it's, even if someone is turning left, it doesn't block the traffic for a moment so someone else can turn out. And so it's really difficult to turn out there. And it has, because of its proximity to the high school, many students that come through that intersection, both as new drivers, you know, 16-year-old drivers, and people students crossing Main Street to walk to school. So I think that's a very important place for a traffic light. And I think actually we made intersection improvements there, I don't know, 15 years ago, I don't remember exactly. And so I think not much intersection work needs to be done, you know, as far as moving the curbs and that kind of thing. I think it's, maybe there's some, but it's not set up badly for traffic signal now.
I believe you're correct for your assessment of Hayward and Maine. Those geometrical changes, I don't think it was 15 years. They look pretty recent. But there were some corner changes that were made for some of the trucks that are making movements in and out of that road, as they have, I forget the big business. But yes, there's that property is right there, so that you do see some truck traffic along Hayward Road, and the geometrical changes at Hayward and Maine were done to help them out. And there is also a flashing beacon on Main Street south of Hayward Road. So those were done pretty recently. I don't think it was 15 years ago. Corey, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 10? Okay.
The flashing beacon is much newer. The flashing beacon is what, 2 years old? It or something like that. It happened, I think, after there was an accident with a student at that intersection.
Yep.
But I think a full signalized intersection is called for there.
Basically, on that end for geometrical improvements, yes, I think it's pretty much set up for that, and it might have been done with that in mind to see if in the future a signal could have been put in, because as I mentioned, 2007, when we did the study back then, just on this intersection, the traffic signal warrants were met then, and the traffic just has gone up. Even without the signal, the traffic has gone up. To your other question, for the flashing beacon in Jefferson and Charter, I think we did have it on Charter as well. Sorry if I didn't mention that, but if we didn't, it's definitely another location that's that they could use it, as there are a lot of kids that cross either one of those crosswalks right there, so they could definitely use it.
And the bike lanes are really good for that road. There's all sorts of, vehicle
Yes.
and non-vehicle traffic.
The idea behind also the bicycle lanes was we are actually able to narrow down the travel lanes.
Yes.
So by narrowing down the travel lanes, we can slow down the vehicular traffic as well. So we can get the feel of the roadway just to be more slow and safer for everybody to use, bike, ped, and whatnot.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I walked Strawberry Hill when you did the study,
Yes.
and I heard about painting the center of the road. I come down in the morning when everybody else is going up and going around those curves. People are driving because the road is so narrow in the center of the road. And some mornings my heart goes woo. It's very dangerous.
Yes, definitely. Like I said, it's definitely worth another look or a deeper look into the historic setting of this roadway to see how much could we do, because even maybe the sidewalk adjacent to it may not be that easy to do. We have to meet the specific requirements for it, but those things need to be looked into more detail.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Corey, do you have anything for us?
No, that pretty much covers everything that we went through. As you mentioned, we've got short-term changes and long-term. One of the ones we've done, we did add a flashing beacon at the Hayward by Jefferson Road. We improved the ramps there and did that, so we are looking at some of the short-term, sort of easy ones we can put in, and we're coming up with sort of a list of other places with all these issues to try to implement more improvements throughout town. So.
Good. What's involved in getting reflectors on trees and utility poles?
Typically the utility companies, I know on some streets, the newer poles, you'll see reflectors on the utility poles. I don't know about trees per se, but Dean might have more experience with that from his former life.
The state law specifically requires that the tree warden sign off on attaching anything to a tree, but it doesn't seem like if you don't have a reflector there, the tree's going to get hit by a car anyway, which is going to cause more problems. So I think they should be able to accommodate that.
All right. Are there questions? I see people standing there. Comments?
Yeah, so maybe if you've got the PowerPoint, if you could go
Could
back
you
to...
Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ian Watkins. My wife and I live at the intersection of Strawberry Hill and Pope. So we have first-hand experience of the issues at that particular intersection. I don't know if you could go back to the slide 3 of that particular point. So right now, and we actually said something at the public inquiry. No, it's Strawberry, not that's Hayward. We have to that corner to get coming from Concord across Strawberry Hill. The sight lines are so bad that we actually wind the window down to listen to cars coming up Pope, because it's impossible to see them at the speed they're coming any other way. So 2 observations on that. Firstly, would strongly urge any consideration, and I think it's maybe in there, of anything that slows down or warns the traffic coming towards that corner, because at the moment the speed limit only changes after that intersection on Pope Road for some strange reason. I think that's in the plan. The only thing that I don't get completely with the proposal, which I otherwise support, is what is taking out the Y. And the reason for that is because that Y at the moment takes traffic away from that immediate intersection, and therefore makes it a little bit easier for the cars coming from Concord to actually get across because there's less traffic there. But if it becomes more congested, then it's harder. You actually have to be watching cars in more traffic coming up in more directions, in a way that the existing Y is almost like a relief road. So I'd make that's the only thing I'd maybe ask consideration on. The rest of the proposals make a lot of sense. Although sidewalk on Strawberry Hill I think might be tricky. I walk along it every day. and I don't know how you'd get a sidewalk as well as traffic, as well as a line down the middle. That's the only other thing I'm not sure about. But I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Can I answer a
Sure.
question? So, when it comes down to removing the Y, I can see your point about pulling off the traffic. The idea of actually just having specifically 2 points of entry and exit on each roadway. If you were about to make a right turn on from Pope Road onto Strawberry Hill Road, if you're going northbound and trying to take a right to go eastbound, or vice versa, going southbound to go westbound, you're stopping the traffic that's behind you or slowing them down at least. So that should provide a little bit more of a safer turn for, number one, the person on Pope Road getting into Strawberry Hill Road, but also help you coming out of Strawberry Hill Road to make a movement safer as the traffic behind the turning vehicle is slowing down on Pope Road. Whereas today, that slip lane from Pope Road to Strawberry Hill Road doesn't stop traffic at all. Anybody can keep going the 30-40 miles per hour that they're going, cut off, taking that right, and the vehicle behind them doesn't have to slow down at all. They can keep going the 30-40 miles per hour as they are going today. So that's the idea, just bringing everything to that one intersection, slowing down everybody because of the turning movements. They have to happen in slower speeds than they're happening today, and hopefully they can cut down speed for everybody on that end.
Did you say that you'd got an agreement with the house owner about improving the sightlines anyway? Because
The
that was-
engineering department mentioned
That's
something
working on
that's in the works, yes.
Okay.
That's in the works.
Franny?
It's interesting you say that. Thanks. It's interesting you say that about making it smaller, because that was always a sort of personal gripe I have about what we did to Hayward Road and Main Street, because it used to be that people would have to slow down when people were waiting to turn left, so it helped everyone. And then we improved it by making it a little wider, and now people go around some people, and so it sort of made it harder for some people. I had a couple of comments. One was about lines. So there's no lines on either of these streets, right?
Hayward Road does have a yellow center
They
line,
do have
but Strawberry Hill does not.
Okay, because it was very interesting to learn. Recently, we met with the town of Littleton and some people from Metropolitan Area Planning Council and MassDOT, and they told us that actually on these country roads, it was safer for bicycles when you didn't have a center line, because it looked more like a smaller road and people had to be more careful to go around, and that when there was the center line, people felt more highway-ish, and it's like, I own this place, and so they sort of seemed to go. Anyway, that was interesting. I would love if you would be in communication with them about that question, because it was very interesting to me. It makes me bring up an issue which we will be talking about, the charge of Transportation Advisory Committee. When we hear about sidewalks, you know, in something like this, if there's a sidewalk that's recommended, it raises the question of how will sidewalks that are recommended in a situation like this fit into the present priorities of sidewalks. And of course there are other sidewalks that, due to changes in land use that we have in town, that there is that question of how they fit into the previous priorities. I wanted to note that somebody came. I'm the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee, but also I'm on Commission on Disabilities, and somebody who has a son with, or child with visual impairment crosses Hayward Road at Jefferson, and that was part of the consideration of the safety there. And lastly, if you can, this is a question, if you can put in a bike lane in parts of Hayward Road, would it be possible to, instead of putting that bike lane in with the road, put it in with the sidewalk, turn it into a multi-trail, so they're both protected from the road? That's the question.
Yes.
To start off with a question on the paint line, that's a very good point. I think every situation is basically specific to its own needs and the own character of the roadway. I think today, because we have the traffic that comes down on the roadway cutting through, the Concord Rotary. They don't want to go through the Concord Rotary at all because of the heavy traffic. So you're getting very directional traffic and traffic that goes really fast there. Without putting that line down there, they will be using the entire roadway. And even if you have a cyclist on there, I don't know how safe it will be for them to just keep it like that, and vehicles still feel like they can use the entire roadway. But that's something we can definitely look into further. As I mentioned before, we definitely did a high-level analysis over here. We didn't dig into too deep into too many details here. We just felt that by actually putting down a double yellow center line here, we're going to narrow down the roadway. And as you're already kind of feeling that you're close to some of the trees and the branches here, even though we can clear some of them, but we're not proposing widening the pavement, you still have a certain width of pavement to travel down. So at least that can get you traveling slower, thus helping also with the bicycles as you're traveling in the same lane with them. I hope that answers that question. When it comes to Hayward Road and the bicycles on the sidewalk, we can look into that. Again, as I mentioned, it seemed like there was some width over there we can work with. I think it's just what the town is willing to work with, because I think that it requires a little bit more work now to widen a sidewalk to make a shared use path, or have two separate spots on that sidewalk, or at least elevated path off of the road to have a space for the pedestrians and a space for the bicycles. Because now you're talking anywhere between 10 to 14 feet to put something like that down there, especially with a divider to separate the two different modes on a sidewalk. So those can definitely be looked at. One thing to mention for Hayward Road, we have the bridge over Route 2, and that's, I believe, a Mass DOT owned bridge, so we can get those recommendations up to that point, but then at that bridge they have to drop you down to the road either way, unless somebody can convince Mass DOT to change that bridge as you're doing the work on the roadway. So you can include that part, but yes, it's definitely something we can look at for Hayward Road and the bicycles.
Great, thank you very much. Any other comments?
Chair Fredericks, West Acton again. I have a couple questions and then some comments. Is there currently a pedestrian blinking light at Hayward right now?
Hayward at Jefferson, there's a flag.
Right,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you. I'm so glad they got that. So I would recommend that we put a pedestrian light in there now. You know, we're talking millions of dollars about a potential light. Let's put a pedestrian light in and see what happens. We could study the accidents before and after. I think it would slow things down. So that's one thing. Is there a crosswalk at Donnellan's going to the path to the apartments? You know, considering there's hundreds of people that live behind Makahut Church there. Is there plans to make a crosswalk across from the parking lot to the sidewalk, north side sidewalk on Route 2A? Because I see a lot of people crossing with carrying their groceries and everything else, and you know, not just going to the restaurant.
We put one at the Brook Street section last
Yeah, they
year.
don't walk that down there. They walk right out from the you know, from parking lot to parking lot, the Donnellan's to the Makahut, and then up through the informal path there. So I would urge that, just because you see so many people walking there, and they're vulnerable in that area. So, and also, did the plan, I couldn't tell, does the plan include a sidewalk to the apartments? Because that, again, there's hundreds of people live back, might be 500 people that live back in there, I'm not sure how many. And then just relative to Franny's comment, the progressive planning organizations in Europe are finding that when they take out the lines and the signs, that people drive slower, that when you put the lines in and the signs, you know, you think it's going to, conventional wisdom dictates that the signs will slow them down and the lines will have them keep to their sides, but it doesn't. It creates a highway-like opportunity where they just say that they're in charge. This is car-centric, and I urge you not to be putting the lines in, not to mention the property values that the insurance rates go up when you have a double line out in front of your house. So I urge you not to be taking out trees and widening it to accommodate cars. I noticed there's like 30 to 40 signs. I feel like that's litter. I don't think that we're any safer. In fact, I think we're less safe with all the signs and the lines, and increasing the width of the road and all that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Rick Kennan, 97 Strawberry Hill Road, so halfway between Estherbrook and Pope Road, so I see this on a daily basis. I'm somewhat ambivalent about the recommendations here. First of all, we chose Strawberry Hill Road because of the scenic byway nature of the area, and we really enjoy that. But I'm also a bicycle commuter, and so on a daily basis, I see the cars speeding through there, and it's obviously a safety concern. As Joan knows, because she lives in the neighborhood there, people speed through there, and short of some improvement to the Concord Rotary, I don't think we're going to see people not cutting through on Strawberry Hill Road. So I think that the immediate problem is to get people to slow down on Strawberry Hill Road. I think all the signs that you suggested, while they may look good on paper here, I think a static sign becomes kind of background noise to people after a while. They just kind of ignore it. Anecdotally, they put a dynamic speed sign on Westford Road in Concord, and I've noticed a significant decrease in speed on that road. And I think a dynamic speed sign on Strawberry Hill Road would do a lot to slow down people on Strawberry Hill Road. The other thing, as Joan noted, was the location of utility poles on Strawberry Hill Road. If you walk down Strawberry Hill, you'll see several utility poles that have been damaged by people who hit those poles because they're so close to the roadway. So I think the two immediate things that could be done is to improve the safety would be, one, install those dynamic speed signs, and two, to move some of the utility poles. Thank you. Thank you for the study, and thank you for your attention.
No, go ahead.
My name is Beth Schrager. I live on Hayward Road. And my question is, has there been any consideration of what a traffic light would do to people coming off of Route 2, which is probably, I want to say, less than a mile from that intersection? At most, it's a mile. So I was just wondering, will that cause a backup, people coming off at rush hour onto Route 27, coming, I don't know, eastbound and westbound, I guess? That's my question.
Pretty easy answer. Like, as I mentioned before, we only did traffic counts to see if we meet the warrants to put a light. We didn't go beyond there to actually study any backups, any delays, nothing of that nature at this point. But it's definitely on the table for discussion and further study. We just looked into if it meets the warrants. That's all we did. So,
okay.
To really answer your question, no, we didn't.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. I mean, there are times of the day that, you know, between the plaza, the Lando's, Not Your Average Joe Plaza, and Route 2, that it gets congested.
There would definitely be something to look into if that is decided to be studied further, the signal. Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry to come back on this again. With due respect to my near neighbour over there, the bicyclist, I think we would maintain that the issue with speeding is much more to do with Pope Road than it is to do with Strawberry Hill. If you know that how much speed you can or can't get up on those roads compared to each other, Pope Road, I think, is much worse. So if we were talking about putting dynamic signalling, that would be personally where I would go for first.
Thank you.
And again, it's based on the fact that we live on the corner, so we hear the screeches, the horns, and everything else on a regular basis.
Good evening. I'm Rob Block. I live at 89 Strawberry Hill Road. I'm supportive of the recommendations of the study for the short-term and long-term improvements of the road. Anything to slow down the cars would be useful. Anything to accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists would be useful. And I'd strongly encourage any sidewalks that we could put in, if they were put away from on the other side of the rock wall, then right along the edge of the road, it would be an improvement.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben Robinson. I'm here with my daughter. We live on Lady Slipper Lane, and just want to say we're all for it, the study recommendations.
Thank you.
Take it right off.
You can just take it off.
So every day in the morning,
there's ongoing traffic when I have to wait for the bus, and sometimes, well, one year the bus went, the bus doors were on this side and the bus kept coming this way, so we had to go across the street, and I think it would be, that would be really dangerous for us, since I have 2 little siblings who are, well, one of them's in kindergarten, and that's why I think we should install sidewalks for Strawberry Hill, so that people can get along it safely, and especially when the bikers come by and everyone, and when people march through the roads. So that's really all I have to say, but
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you for coming and speaking. Anyone else? Okay. Do you have anything else, Corey?
I think that's it for the street projects we have.
Now, we have a presentation on the ADA.
Yes.
I think some folks may be here waiting to see if there's any further action on Prospect. So if you don't intend to take any further action, I think we should let them know.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Are you looking for the board to express a preference for one of the design options?
I think at this point we have the recommendations, and this is part of the public input process. If there's an option that the board wants us to move forward with, we will certainly do that. If there's 1 or 2 that you want us to exclude, that'll reduce the scope of work that we do and maybe bring back more information for you about the options that you want us to consider further, so that we can put this into the road construction planning and work that we want to do over the next year or 2.
Peter?
So niche, if we say go ahead and explore this further, is niche, as part of their scope of services to continue design for whatever option we think they ought to go forward with, or does that have to be bid out again to somebody else?
Their scope was strictly feasibility, so
Okay.
depending on the level.
Yeah. I just had another question, if I could ask the engineer. So I don't see in your report a level of service improvements or whatever. What would the level of service be for option 1 after? Is it above D or?
So the level of service is treated differently for non-signalized intersections.
Okay.
I think those are level of service F, I think, because the cars don't have enough opportunity to pull out onto Main
And
Street.
turning in.
But it's a different set of criteria for an unsignalized intersection versus a signalized intersection.
And what is that? That's just delays, or
Yeah,
is there a safety issue to level of service?
No,
thing?
that's
It's just
based on
time?
that's delay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Peter? David?
I would like to move that the board endorse option 1 at the intersection of Main and Prospect.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion?
And that's the no changes, just the geometric improvements.
You're right. It's not rotary, not signalized. It changes the points where you can come in and out of Main Street onto one of the prospects.
Okay. Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So Corey's next item is the presentation of the ADA.
Should we have any discussion about Strawberry Hill and Hayward to give direction?
Well, those were feasibility studies, and but we certainly would welcome any direction. Yes, but we're working on those currently.
Is there still work to do on those? Is that
Yes.
the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
So those were just small signage and small recommendations. If there's anything in particular that you saw that you want us to not continue to study, then that would be helpful feedback at this point, but there's no major changes that we're proposing based on those studies that we need you to direct us on tonight.
Can I just ask then, at this point, we're not yet considering or endorsing or whatever a traffic light at the corner of Hayward and Main?
Correct. That was just, we didn't even do the feasibility study on it. We just did a traffic count just to double check the work that was done 12 years ago to see if the traffic counts were any different. And if we were to take that any further, it would require additional design work.
Okay, thank you.
One note, just while since we're back on Strawberry Hill Road, that is on the town meeting warrant to have that sight line situation taken care of. It's 127 Strawberry Hill Road. You met with the owners earlier, well, in 2019, and there was an arrangement between planning and them and engineering to move that wall or do some things to make sight lines better. So that's, I think it's Article 34, just so you have that.
Okay. So ADA?
Yep. This was a project that we took on looking at all the town buildings. We were looking at the public facilities, looking at accessibility issues, what we need to fix, everything from parking your car to getting in the building. So on this project, we reached out to some experts and we were able to hire Mike Kunda from EMG, now a new name, but I'll hand it off to him. He kind of went through all the self-evaluation, looking at the buildings and looking at the issues. So.
Okay, you're on.
Hi, thank you, Corey. Michael Conniff with Bureau Veritas.
Could you speak closer to the mic?
Sure. How's this? Good. Is that better? Yeah, as Corey mentioned, we were in charge of doing the accessibility assessments and the transition plan, I believe starting in mid-2018. I want to say it was, the scope included municipal buildings, not the schools, not the public right-of-way, so it was a limited scope to certain buildings. Yeah, perfect. So there's a lot of data that is collected during the process. The reports for each facility can be 30, 40, 50, 60 pages depending on the findings. So what we're going to present tonight is really just a sort of a bird's eye view or a snapshot of what we found and what we have in the transition plan. So there's a little bit of background that we'll go through, but I think I can keep it to 10 or 15 minutes or so and then open it up for questions. We can go to the next slide. So the first part is really just sort of a real quick review of accessibility regulations and where they apply. So we can skip to the next one here already. And the goal of the ADA is to prevent discrimination. That's really the goal. So if something isn't provided as a service, it reaches a little bit different level when we start to talk about state and local governments. It differs from typical commercial establishments in that the programs need to be accessible. Go ahead. And a little bit of a background on the ADA. Most people are familiar with how it started in the early 90s. There have been some changes. We do the assessments based on the 2010 standards, which are the most recent, primarily because we're not always 100% sure when buildings have been renovated. So those, typically when it's renovated, you'll have to meet the current standards. So we'll assess it based on the current and make recommendations from there. Yeah, we can move ahead here. This is just sort of a slide showing the 5 parts of the ADA, and primarily we're focusing on Title II, which is public entities such as state and local governments. As part of the process, there are certain areas of buildings that may be accessed by employees only, where Title I does take effect, and that's essentially, making reasonable accommodations for employees who may be have any type of disability. We can skip ahead. We sort of touched on this a little bit, where Title II requires that programs and policies be accessible. We do look at both the state and federal regulations. The state of Massachusetts Accessibility Code has some nuances with it that have some areas that are more strict than the federal, and in that case we've assessed it based on the Massachusetts Accessibility Code. This slide here is sort of just an overview of certain things we typically see the ADA apply to. In this case, recreation, Parks and Rec weren't a part of this particular scope. It was really the municipal buildings, but within those municipal buildings, we see most of the other features on here. Parking, getting from the parking to the entrance, certain amenities within the building, communication, such as visual aids, communications. I think we can go to the next one. So this is just really a little bit of background on the process and the why. We'll get into some of the details in just a minute, but this slide here is talking about programs and the fact that each and every facility is not required to be made accessible. When we do the assessments, it's easier for us to sort of look at the facility to start because it's tangible. We can measure it. We can look at it and see what's compliant, what isn't compliant. There's certain apologize for my voice. There's certain instances where it doesn't always make sense, or it can't, due to some reason, whether the building is historically protected or there's some structural, impracticability. Then you'd move to make the program accessible either by some accommodation or perhaps relocating. We'll go to the next one. I'm not going to read the whole list here, but there's a lot of things that we look at when we do the assessments. It's a long list, but there's a lot of elements and a lot of amenities at the different properties. Some of these would apply, not all of them to each facility, but certainly something to think about. We see it a lot where we'll introduce ourselves and tell people what we're doing, and they'll say, well, we're compliant, we have a ramp. It's not necessarily the case. There's people with a wide range of disabilities, vision impairments, hearing loss. There's certain instances where somebody who may be ambulatory, I'll pick on a drinking fountain. You've probably seen the high and low. Well, the high one is for someone who is ambulatory and may not necessarily be able to stoop low enough to be able to use it. So the assessment covers the full range. And again, here, this slide is really just, showing some of the benefits of making things accessible for people with disabilities. You know, there's some other intrinsic benefits here where, you know, navigating, you know, with a stroller. You know, I have 3 not so little kids anymore, but we've done that. You know, deliveries with hand trucks, things like that. This gets in, looks like I get cut off a little bit there on the top, but we're going to take a quick look at what we found in terms of the number of barriers at each facility. And with the help of Corey and some questionnaires and some observations, we've put together sort of a priority of where we think is the highest public use. Go ahead. This slide here, I won't read this one in its entirety either, but it's the goal of the Commission on Disabilities for Acton. So really they're a group that's, you know, for the good of the people. So I encourage people to reach out to them and you know, use them as a resource. Sort of the what, why, and how. The plan, it says it's a structured plan. Really, the transition plan is intended to be a little bit more fluid. I would say we call it a living transition sometimes, or a living transition plan, because certain things happen. Budgets change, needs change, damage can occur. You know, so if you're having to rebuild something, you know, due to a storm, or a tree uproots a sidewalk, some of those things kind of change priority a little bit. But the goal or the takeaway here with the findings is to make sure that they're incorporated into capital planning, you know, wherever possible, so that, you know, some of these barriers to accessibility don't get lost, especially when things are, you know, slated for redevelopment or improvements. And we sort of just touched on this a little bit, but the evaluations have taken place. We gather all the data. We measure a lot. Everything from opening force of doors to, you know, slopes of parking spaces, curb ramps, widths. We call it a level 3 assessment internally. It's really a measured assessment versus just a visual. But the assessments were compiled, and the transition plan is really the culmination of all those individual facility assessments, and with that we sort of, you know, help drive the priority, but it's also, you know, certainly open, you know, to suggestions or the needs of the town. So I'm gonna skip to the next. Yeah, so part of it is the first line here. It says complex but manageable. There's a lot of regulations. There's a lot of requirements under the ADA, and it can be a lot to. It's too much to memorize. I have to look stuff up all the time, and I do it almost on a daily basis. But the goal of the transition plan is to have it, you know, in front of you and be able to manage it, and see it and be able to act on it. Public input, that can be from, you know, anything from a grievance, complaints made to the ADA coordinator, maybe something that, you know, that happens. You know, things come in and out of come out of compliance just due to I'll take even snowplows, for example. Hasn't been a bad winter, but they can do a number on concrete curb ramps and stuff like that, so things can come up. So the goal was to develop a transition plan. We set it up by phase as opposed to strict plan years, because we know these budgets change continuously. And we can go to the next one. This is just some of the facilities we assessed, some of the municipal buildings. We can move ahead here. So yeah, 16 facilities. The 630 total barriers is individual line items that were, tallied from each facility. And it sounds like a lot, but there's a wide range of cost and severity with all of those. A lot of them can be something as simple as a sign being at the wrong height. So it's, like I said, there's a lot of information to process, and intentionally we're not going to go through all the reports. It could probably take a few days of me speaking, so we just wanted to hit some of the highlights. The programs and policies assessment was also done through some interviews and some questionnaires. Yeah, so that was all put together, and we've come up with the actual transition plan, which again is sort of the culmination of all the individual assessments. The removal prioritization, essentially that's the goal, is to make the buildings and the facilities and the programs barrier free to persons with disabilities. So we've sort of put a ranking to those based on public usage. There are some other methods. One of them we like to call low-hanging fruit, which is something that's relatively inexpensive and easily achieved. So there's always opportunities to make some adjustments here. But essentially, the DOJ, who enforces the ADA, is looking at accessible parking and the route to the entrance as priority one, for somebody to be able to arrive and physically get to the front door of the building. And then priority 2, 3, and 4 will follow a little bit behind, and making the elements within the facilities accessible. Go ahead. So the facilities that we assessed are all listed here, and based on certain input and just visual observations, we've put together phase 1 through 4. Purposely without a year, because we know budgets are going to be, key to driving this process. But what we saw as the highest public use was, obviously the town hall, library. I visited the Narrow Ledge Rockway building. It was in the summer, so it was busy. It may not be in the winter. I'm not sure, but it was a busy facility, and on the other end, we were looking at sites that were primarily employee only with very limited public use. You can go ahead. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier about alternate methods of barrier removal. Hitting the easy ones first. For some really large programs that we work on, if there's several hundred buildings, sometimes we start organizing things in different ways to try to come up with something that really works. In this particular case, we primarily looked at public use and identified facilities that may be addressed first. Yeah, go ahead. So that's sort of where we're at now. We've done the assessments on an individual basis and compiled all that data into what we labeled the transition plan. And there's sort of an overview of each facility. But looking ahead, there's work to be done really in terms of budgeting and capital planning, and to see how the list of barriers and costs sort of fits into the overall, budget and plan for the town and the facilities. So that's sort of the second bullet point there, is integrating, budget constraints. So a plan like this, realistically, it's years in the making. It's not something that typically happens within, months, even when you're not dealing with, hundreds of schools in a county or something like that. But the goal is to, be able to track the progress. So the plan we're presenting, I think, gives the town the tools to be able to track that. And that is just about it. There's some resources here that we've put together. ADA.gov is a good one, but also, more locally, the Massachusetts Office on Disability. They're going to probably be a great resource, not just for information, but there's oftentimes grants available and stuff like that. So that's really about it. I'm certainly open to any questions.
Thank you. Dean, anything?
Well, yeah, I worked on one of these back in the late 80s, so things haven't changed that much, I guess. I guess I've read through most of the documents, the plan and all the studies that were done for the individual buildings. And I guess the question is, the town manager, how are we going to implement this? Is this going to be just factored in a bit at a time in our budget, or is it something you're looking forward to in the years to come, or?
Yeah, so these reports create a great resource for us, for all of our, Corey shared these all with every department that is in a building, and so we've been looking at these over the last year, and they certainly have been incorporated into our budget planning and will continue to be. One of the kind of higher profile accessibility projects we put in the budget this year was the bathroom at Town Hall. As you know, there's no upstairs but accessible bathroom. And so if that's approved, we can move forward on one thing, which is in one of the 16 reports, and we're going to continue to chip away at all the other ones. So yeah, but it's a work in progress. We'll do as much as we can every year.
Okay, thank you.
Well, having lived through the Kennedy building, it took quite a while. First we had the ramp, and you couldn't get on the ramp because you couldn't go through the door. So that building is now, I think, complete. But it takes a long time.
If I remember correctly, they were working on that while we were doing the assessment, so there may be things on the list that are already resolved.
Yeah. All right, anybody else on this?
No.
Franny?
Speaking as a resident, I'm not representing the COD. I think it sounds like a very reasonable amount, less than, the 1.5 million to do all 630 things that have to be done. I'm sort of encouraged by that estimate. my question, I have two questions. One is, once we do those things that you've recommended on the plan, how do you define our achievement? Are we fully accessible? What is the, what does that mean? And second of all, you mentioned public transportation early on, and I'm wondering how that manifests itself. And did you include the train station and issues there in that study?
Yeah, I can answer the second one first, because I think it'll be an easier explanation. No, the assessments were limited to the 16 facilities that were on the list, and it did not include the public transit or any train stations or anything like that. So, certainly we do have experience with that. This was somewhat limited in scope. That often depends on funding and what's available at the time. The second one, as far as being fully accessible, it's obviously the goal. It's without coming out and doing a reassessment, it'd be hard to verify. But more often than not, major capital improvements, changes to buildings, they'll require, design, whether it's, an architecture and engineering firm or a civil firm, depending on what the scope of work is. They're going to design it, they have to be accessible. And, with construction control and all that, I would feel confident that it would be done correctly. Not everything is executed 100%. We see that sometimes, but it's certainly the ambition.
Anne?
I am here representing the COD. It sounds like a wonderful, comprehensive plan, and we hope to spend some time going over it with a fine-tooth comb. But I am just speaking today or tonight to recognize that John has placed the bathrooms on the outside of 204 on his highest priority, because as we want people to come to town meeting, we also want people to attend select people's meetings as well. And so I just wanted to speak to the fact that we appreciate the fact that this study has been done, because if it hasn't been done and it is not complete, when we apply for grants, that impedes our successful getting of those grants. The only comment was, I wish that you had come and spoken to us at one of our meetings, and perhaps at some point you will come to one of our meetings, because there's a lot in the plan. I tried to get a copy of the whole plan, and Austin said that's 2,000 pages. So it will take me longer than 1 hour and a half meeting to get everybody through the 2,000 pages, but we will get through it. And again, I wish to thank you. And I just want to comment, one comment for Corey. There is a handicapped parking sign down on the area behind the South Acton train station. It was apparently taken down by a snowplow, and that is a high priority to get that fixed ASAP.
I think, look, we got a call this morning. I think we fixed it, but I might be.
I don't know. I just heard about it, and it had not been fixed. So.
We got an email this morning.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's the same one, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tara?
Tara Projects, West Acton. Would the $1.5 million be over a period of years, and was it included in the general budget, some portion of it this year?
So the $1.5 million is just adding up all the single line items and the cost and the value that the consultant assigned to each of the line items. So it's not one project, it's
Lots.
500 little projects, or maybe more than that. So no, the answer, we have not we don't have a $1.5 million appropriation to do all those little things, because in practice, it would probably cost more than that.
So I'll ask it a different way. How many years would it take to achieve it, and do you think you can fit it within the general budget, or are you thinking of getting most of it through grants, or where do you think funding would come from?
Yeah, I
To
addressed
be
it.
decided.
Yeah, I addressed that earlier. We're going to work it into every year that we can.
Great, thank you. And then I'm totally in support of this. The whole concept of the town meeting improvement committee, like we referred to, is to get people to town meeting, but as my perspective at least, it's also getting people to participate in the process leading up to town meeting, because if people view town meeting as just a rubber stamp for deals that have already been made or plans that have already made, I think people are less interested in coming. But if they're part of the process all the way through, and I looked at some of the information online, and I was very much in favor of everything I read. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the only action that we would ask is the board to consider accepting the report. They don't need to approve it or adopt it, but just to accept it.
I would move then that we accept the Town of Acton accessibility and the ADA transition plan dated February 24, 2020.
Motion made. Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, I just have one question. This includes a transition plan as well? I mean, you've done the assessment. I'm looking at the town hall, you've got the priorities and everything. That's the transition plan too, right?
Yes and no, sir. So the transition plan proper is a single document that sort of combines the individual facility assessments as well as some other data that we put together. I did forward a copy of that particular document, I believe, earlier today, this morning.
Okay, so that was my question. Has that
Yeah.
been completed? I mean, it's not in our package, but it's been done.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was looking through some records preparing for the meeting, and it looked like it had not been, delivered in that particular format. The information is all there in the individual reports for the most part, however, lacking the prioritization that you'll see in the transition plan.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, updated Transportation Advisory Committee change.
So we worked, one of the goals of the Board of Selectmen this year was to change some committees around, and one of those recommendations was to combine the Pedestrian Safety Committee with the Transportation Advisory Committee. We worked with current chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee and other folks to identify what an appropriate charge for this new super committee would look like, and that was what was included in the packet for your consideration.
I don't have it.
I don't.
It's online.
It's online.
Okay,
Oh.
we didn't print it as well. So,
Could you just read the charge?
Yes.
Is it too long? Or?
I can read it.
Sure.
Okay, Transportation Advisory Committee TAC membership, 5 full members, 2 associate members, 3-year terms appointed by the Board of Selectmen. Meetings, the 4th Wednesday of each month, and additional meetings scheduled on an as-needed basis. Monthly meetings held at 7:30 p.m. at Town Hall and may last until 9:30 or later. Occasional meetings are held at the Human Resource Center and Senior Center, 30 Sudbury Road. Committee responsibilities. The Transportation Advisory Committee guides and recommends local transportation planning efforts, taking proactive and reactive approach to focus on transportation, traffic, bicycling, and pedestrian issues, appraise the public of issues through meetings and presentations, respond to and solicit citizens' comments and requests, opine on transportation-related appropriation requests for capital and operating expenses, fares and parking fees, and town meeting articles. Make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen and other boards, committees, and town meeting. Keep apprised of and coordinate with the work of the South Acton Train Station Advisory Committee and the Commission on Disabilities. Individuals may participate in regional groups such as Minuteman Advisory Group for Interlocal Coordination, MAGIC, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, Regional Transportation Advisory Council, RTAC, Lowell Regional Transit Authority, LRTA, Crosstown Connect Transportation Management Association, Minuteman Regional Coordinating Council, AARP, Livable Communities, Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, Assabet River Rail Trail, Fitchburg Line Working Group, and MassDOT conferences. Member responsibilities. Members may be assigned primary or secondary responsibility for specific issues. This might lead to gathering information, reviewing technical analysis, speaking to citizens, coordinating with town officials, and forming preliminary recommendations to report back to the committee. Beyond these specific assignments, some preparation should be expected before monthly meetings. Responsibility for taking and distributing minutes rotates with each meeting. Consistent attendance at meetings is important. Prerequisites for membership. Experience or familiarity with transportation or planning or cycling or pedestrian issues is useful. Most important requirements are common sense, a willingness to learn and seek creative solutions to transportation problems, and recognition that transportation planning should serve the driving and non-driving community, including cyclists, pedestrians, residents, employees, commuters, and visitors in Acton. More details on issues covered. There's an outline here. So first, public transportation, on-demand, flexible transportation, including senior and paratransit services, fixed routes, including commuter shuttles, microtransit, Crosstown Connect, Lowell Regional Transit Authority. Traffic, local roadway problems, infrastructure, parking, MassDOT, Complete Streets Program, traffic calming. Bicycling, roadways and multi-use paths, access issues, bicycle parking, MassDOT compliant, MassDOT Complete Streets Program, safety. And finally, pedestrian, sidewalk construction and repair priority lists, evaluate sidewalks using established criteria, pedestrian-friendly areas, neighborhood traffic calming, crosswalks, MassDOT Complete Streets Program, and safety.
That was a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
The only thing I would suggest, and I was surprised in here, was the detail on meetings and who would take minutes and that kind of thing. That's just kind of annoying in the charge, because if you want to switch your meetings to Thursday, or you want to say the same person takes minutes every time, I just think that's constraining, and you have to come to the board again to get your charge changed. But that's just me. If you guys are happy with that, that's fine. Otherwise, I thought it's good.
Franny?
Yeah, I have no problem. I think that's a good idea not to have that in the charge. We were just writing down all the material that would go into the website. So it's fine not to include those details of when the meetings are happening and who's taking notes. There are a couple of other things that I think should be, I wanted to mention. One is that we have staff support now from Austin, and so maybe that should be somewhere in there. And another is that we, wait, I was just looking at it. Let me just remember what it was. Oh yes, about the membership. I wanted to note that Sudbury recently created a new transportation committee, and theirs is sort of populated with, the police chief, the director of the senior center, the planning director. It's a sort of different than our resident committee. And I sort of wanted to raise that question, whether we want that type. I think we talked about it in our last Transportation Advisory Committee meeting, and I think people felt that maybe we could just have occasional meetings with the relevant staff people and or invite them as needed, reach out to them. But I just wanted to raise that question, see what you thought about that.
Okay, first item, do we want to take out?
So as part of the motion, I would but based on what Franny said, instead of the whole paragraph on meetings, I would just say monthly meetings. And so that's the second paragraph, Lisa. And then in the last paragraph on the first page, just strike the sentence that says responsibility for taking and distributing meeting minutes rotates with each meeting. And then somewhere in the document say it's supported by the committee is supported by the Director of Intergovernmental Services. Is that right?
Governmental affairs?
Yeah, affairs, but yeah.
Intergovernmental affairs.
Well, okay.
Or, sorry.
I mean, we've had issues with staffing committees, and it's obviously a time issue. There are several committees that don't have any staff support that are crying for staff support. I mean, particularly with the police chief or the safety officer or whatever, I would think you could, how did you deal with Doug? Did he staff your committee, actually come to all the committee meetings? And
it was sort of at the end of his, he had become part-time by the time so he didn't. By the time we had a transportation coordinator, it was around the time he was retiring in part. So we never had a staff person coming, and so it's been wonderful to have Austin.
Well, yeah, I mean, Austin is doing the transportation stuff now, so would he be more appropriate than Selby? Or
He is the one who comes.
I could designate staff as appropriate, and we could leave it at that.
Yeah.
Or we just not say anything.
Or you could just say staff if it happens.
Well, based on this, a little bit, I would propose my previous two changes, that's the second paragraph and striking the minutes, and not say anything about staff.
Okay. Motion amended.
Oh,
Everyone clear? Motion amended and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Before-
Aye.
Oh, we gotta go. We got so much more to do.
But it was a wording change.
What?
It was a wording change I wanted in there. Can we have a minor typo? I mean, not typo, a word choice that I can just talk to Lisa about
Yes.
afterwards? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Surplus property at 3 School Street.
This is just very quickly an update to the board that the RFP for people that may want to buy that property is due this week. It's due Friday. So if we get any proposals, I'll be able to share them with you next week.
Oh, great.
And just an opportunity if anybody has questions.
All right. Well, if anybody is still watching, we do need volunteers on our boards and committees, so please come into Town Hall if you're interested.
Yeah, I think what's really important is that the volunteer coordinating committee is a very dutiful group, but to really increase the staffing, I think it's incumbent upon each of us individually as we, make our rounds around town and, talk with people and people who express an interest or a complaint or an interest, to reach out and say, we have an opening on this committee, would you consider it? And do that with, some energy. And I've been able to recruit a number of good people who have, joined, and particularly, the next generation, younger people. And I think that's what we've really got to do. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to take the lead on it.
Okay. Deadline for submitting nominations for Volunteer of the Year and date when awards will be publicly announced.
Yeah, I asked for this to be put on the agenda. Last year, we had the sitting board of select board nominate their candidates for the Colonel Faulkner Senior Volunteer of the Year Award for exemplary volunteer service. Before the departing members went off the board, even though the actual awards are not until later on in the year after the new board is in place. So I would request that we do that again. That would be me that would have the opportunity to nominate somebody before my term ends. So And we wanted to talk to Lisa about scheduling a date for the award ceremony and a date by which we would get nominations in and make them publicly announced.
So next meeting, can we, the 5 of us, have our volunteers?
Sure.
We're meeting Monday, a week from tonight.
Yeah. Is everybody okay with that?
Everybody understands that it's one of the committees that you're a liaison to, and the standard is basically exemplary volunteer service above and beyond the call of duty.
Yeah.
And so do we have a date for the actual award ceremony yet, Lisa?
In the packet, there's 2 that I've reserved in May. Both of them are Thursday evenings.
7th and 14th of May, I think.
I don't know, my computer's dead, sorry.
I'm pretty sure it was the 7th and 14th of May. The first and
Yeah,
second
those are both Thursdays, so
Yeah.
And that would be at Nara?
yes, at the picnic pavilion.
Yeah.
So we want to pick one of those 2 days?
7 or 14? 14.
Okay.
Vote for 7. Okay.
Okay, I mean, do you have a conflict?
Not a big one. I can deal.
Okay. I just thought it would be warmer later.
Just
Okay, May 14th. Okay, John, do you want to talk about changing the operating hours at COA?
Yes. Thank you. The departments or the divisions that operate out of 30 Sudbury, which is the senior center, veterans officer, the nursing program, and Laura Ducharme's community resources, are going to try a pilot program to change hours, similar, actually identical to what the town hall hours changed to last summer. And they provided some information about some of the things that this would allow them to do. Much like what's happened at town hall, is it opens up their services to folks that don't have the ability to get there during normal business hours. There is, of course, the trade-off of less hours on Friday afternoons, which I think for nursing, they cover every day, anyways. And veterans and Laura, they don't see any issues with that. I think the senior center, there's some things that they will need to do differently in terms of programming, but the COA board voted to try it out. And so I wouldn't move forward if they hadn't, so I think it's worth trying out. They want to start in April, which is just about a month and a half from now, and run it through the summer to allow some of the programming to evolve to see if it works out. And if it does, they can evaluate that at the end. If it doesn't, we can change it.
You looking for a vote on this, or is
I just wanted to make sure that you all knew, that the public knows. One question that I got today actually was, what about lunch on Fridays? That's, people like the lunch at the senior center. They're still going to serve a lunch. I think it might start a little bit earlier, but it'll still be a lunch on Fridays.
Good.
Okay.
Will there be transportation in the evening?
So that's one of the items that we're working on, is how to, because right now our transportation ends at 4:30 or so. So we'll need to figure out how to make that, adapt that to the later Tuesday.
Okay. Back to town meeting?
Yeah. As the liaison to the committee, and I would be happy to work with John and Mark and Joanne Berry in implementing as many as we can of the priority items for town meeting.
Okay.
April.
Sounds good. Shall we go through the articles?
We could do that, just to give everyone information about them, or to assign a select board member to work on them, or both.
Assign a selectman.
Okay. Yeah. Alternatively, you and I could sit down and do a draft.
Great.
Yeah, that's what.
Very nice
That's
job.
what Katie.
Okay.
than you did last
All
year.
right. So we don't have to do that.
And we can bring it Monday, a
Yeah,
week from today.
yeah.
And I just, if we're still on that item, I just wanted to make sure that the board knows that the planning board reviewed the electric vehicle charging bylaw proposal that we discussed at the end of last year, and they supported it.
Oh, good. Okay, consent items. 15, approve meeting minutes, January 8th, 27th, and February 3rd, 2020.
Excuse me, just February 3rd is not available. That'll be ready, so it would just be for the 8th and 27th.
Okay. So approve meeting minutes, January 8th and 27th, 2020. 16, accept gift, Acton Police Department for $10,000 from Middlesex Bank to be used at the discretion of the police chief. 17, accept gift, Acton Fire Department for $10,000 from Middlesex Bank to be used at the discretion of the fire chief. 18, committee appointment, Mona Chandra, full member, Green Advisory Board, effective March 1, 2020. Term to expire 6/30/2021. 19, committee appointment, Nirupa Pama Valenka, full member, Council on Aging, term to expire 6/30/2020. Item 20, committee appointment, Eric Hudson, full member, Green Advisory Board, term to expire 6/30/2023. 21, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Linda Vieira, Nagog Woods Clubhouse, March 3rd, 2020. 22, accept gift, Health Department for $2,500 from Emerson Hospital to co-host presentation with ABRSD, PTSO, ABUW, and Danny's Place. 23, accept gift, Recreation Division for $200 from the Parents Estate Planning Law Firm, PC, for funding a new recreation facility and playground at Jones Field. And 24, accept gift, Council on Aging from Susan Mitchell Hart for $100 towards the Council on Aging gift fund.
I would move that we accept consent items 15 through 24 inclusive.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
So I think we have concluded.
Move to adjourn.
Is anyone still
Second.
awake? Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.